Hello, curious minds, and welcome to Documentary for Sleep. Why are humans so often afraid of the dark, while many animals move through it with ease? This fear isn't just about imagination or childhood stories. It's rooted in our evolution, in the psychology of survival, and in how our senses compare to those of creatures built for the night. In this story, we'll explore why darkness triggers unease in humans, how animals like owls, cats, and bats navigate it without fear, and what this tells us about the deep past of our species. And if this kind of quiet, soft science helps you relax, focus, or simply learn at the end of a long day, consider subscribing. It helps this channel reach more curious sapiens like you. And as always, stay curious, stay calm. Imagine a night 400,000 years ago. The air is cold, the forest a wall of impenetrable sound. Huddled in a shallow cave, a small group of early humans gathers around a flickering flame. Their eyes, wide and reflective, are fixed not on the fire, but on the deep darkness beyond its orange glow. Their ears strain against the chorus of the nocturnal world, listening for the one sound that doesn't belong, the snap of a twig under a weight that is not their own. This fire was more than warmth. It was a line drawn in the sand of time. On one side, the fragile circle of safety, of community, of nascent culture. On the other, the absolute unknown, a realm of teeth and hunger. The fire was the first technology of defiance, a declaration that for a few precious hours, the night would not claim them. This primal scene is etched into our very biology. Our brains, even now, are wired to seek the light. The pupil's frantic dilation in the dark is an ancient alarm system, while its calm contraction in brightness signals a temporary ceasefire with fear. This is more than metaphor. It is a hormonal reality. The warm, dancing light of a flame triggers a reduction in cortisol, the stress hormone, and coaxes forth a sense of calm. It tells our most primitive neural pathways, "You are safe here." The archaeological record bears witness to this turning point. At sites like Gesher Benot Yaakov in Israel, evidence suggests that Homo erectus did not just stumble upon fire. They curated it, maintained it through the night. This was not a tool for hunting, but for holding the line. It was a mobile sanctuary. And this instinct is a ghost that walks among us still. When a storm knocks out the power grid, plunging a modern city into blackness, what is the first thing we do? We scramble for candles, for flashlights, for the glowing screen of a phone. We instinctively recreate that primordial circle of light, seeking not just illumination, but psychological refuge. We are, in that moment, no different from our ancestors, a vulnerable species momentarily reclaiming a small piece of the world from the dark. Yet, if fire was such an effective shield, why does the fear persist? Why does the child's plea for a nightlight feel so universal, so deeply ingrained? The flame did not erase the threat. It merely held it at bay, illuminating the very edge of the territory we could not control. The fear is the ghost of a memory, a fossil emotion buried in the strata of our psyche. It whispers that our mastery is, and has always been, provisional. We learned to push back the night, but in doing so, we became acutely aware of what we were pushing back against. The fire gave us the courage to stay still in the dark, but it also forced us to listen to what was moving within it. For the night was never truly ours. While we huddled around our fragile cradles of light, the darkness remained the absolute domain of the predator. Our fear may be a relic, but it is a relic forged in the very real and constant pressure of being hunted. The circle of firelight was a fortress, but every fortress is defined by what it seeks to exclude. Perhaps our enduring terror is not a failure of evolution, but the echo of a simple, brutal truth. We were not the first to claim the night, and our claim has always been contested. What happens when we consider that for most of our history, we were not the apex predators, but the prey? The darkness was not an empty stage for our fears, but a crowded landscape of eyes that saw perfectly what we could not. The fear of the dark may be less about the absence of light, and more about the presence of a memory, a genetic recollection of a time when the rustle in the bushes was not our imagination, but the beginning of the end. If the fire was our first shield, then what exactly was it shielding us from? A low growl rumbles through the forest, a sound that seems to vibrate not just in the air, but deep within the bones. You see nothing, only an impenetrable wall of black. Yet every hair on your arm stands erect, a primal alarm system screaming of a presence just beyond the edge of perception. This sensation, a cold dread coiling in the stomach, was a familiar companion to our ancient ancestors. It is a ghost that still whispers in the circuitry of our modern minds, a relic of a time when the night did not belong to us. We are creatures of the day. Our eyes, evolutionary marvels in their own right, are fine-tuned for the sun's reign, distinguishing a spectrum of colors to spot ripe fruit or a venomous snake in the dappled light. But in the domain of darkness, we are nearly blind. Meanwhile, the true masters of the night are born ready. A cat, a tiger, an owl, their eyes hold a secret. The tapetum lucidum, a mirrored layer that bounces the faintest sliver of light back through their retinas, giving them a second chance to see. To them, our deepest night is merely a dim twilight. They are the native inhabitants of a world from which we are excluded. The gleam of eyes in a flashlight's beam is not a trick of the light, but a signature of the predator, a stark declaration of their advantage. This was not an abstract fear. The evidence is etched in bone, silent testimony from a more dangerous world. Archaeologists examining the remains of early humans sometimes find them marked by the telltale signs of a predator's meal. Precise puncture wounds from saber-toothed canines, parallel grooves left by the drag of powerful claws. These are not the wounds of battle, but of consumption. The most likely scenario is that these attacks occurred under the cover of darkness, when human camps were at their most vulnerable, when the fire's circle of light was a fragile barrier against the encircling unknown. The night was a hunting ground, and we were on the menu. This ancient vulnerability has left a permanent scar on our psyche. Even now, safe behind locked doors and electric light, the old fears persist in mutated forms. One of the most common symptoms of anxiety is the pervasive, irrational feeling of being watched, especially at night. The shadow at the edge of the room seems to shift. The faint sound from the hallway could be a footstep. This is not mere superstition. It is the ghost of a valid survival instinct, a neural pathway carved by millennia of being prey. Our hyper-vigilant ancestors, the ones who jumped at every rustle, were the ones who lived to see the dawn. But is this fear still rational? We have tamed the night with streetlights and smartphones. The great predators are gone from our cities. Surely this primal dread is an outdated glitch, a stubborn echo with no source. Yet, we still avoid dark alleys. We still feel a chill when the power goes out. The fear persists, not because the tigers are at our door, but because of what the darkness does to us. It strips away our primary sense, our tool for control and comprehension. In the absence of light, there is an absence of data. And it is in this informational vacuum that the oldest part of our brain, the one that remembers the growl in the forest, seizes control. The true terror of the night, then, may not be the predator we fear is there, but the profound helplessness we feel when we can no longer see it coming. If our eyes are our first line of defense, what happens when that line is completely erased? You are walking down a pitch-black corridor. The air is still and silent, a void without echo. There is no sound, no movement to justify the sudden tension coiling in your stomach. Yet, your heart begins to drum a frantic rhythm against your ribs. Your footsteps quicken without conscious command. Your rational mind whispers a calm, logical assurance. There is nothing here. But your body, a separate, ancient entity, refuses to listen. It is already on high alert, operating on a script written long before the invention of reason. This internal dissonance is not a flaw, but a feature, a deeply embedded legacy of survival. The moment your eyes fail to gather meaningful information, a silent alarm is tripped deep within your brain. This is the work of the sympathetic nervous system, the body's primal command center for danger. It operates on a principle far older than logic. When in doubt, prepare for the worst. Without your conscious permission, it floods your bloodstream with adrenaline. Your pupils dilate, desperate to capture every stray photon. Your heart rate accelerates, pumping oxygen-rich blood to your muscles, priming you for a fight or a flight you cannot even see. Your skin grows damp. Sweat makes you more slippery, a small advantage against a predator's grasp. This entire physiological cascade is triggered by an absence, by the simple, terrifying fact of not knowing. Is it not remarkable that the mere lack of light can command such a powerful, full-body response? We can trace the ghost of this fear in the stones left by our ancestors. At archaeological sites dating back to the Paleolithic era, a pattern emerges in the choice of dwelling places. Early humans consistently settled near rivers or on open plains, positions that offered not just water, but a crucial strategic advantage, an unobstructed view. Under the vast canopy of the night sky, a campsite bathed in moonlight provided an early warning system. The open space was a canvas upon which any approaching silhouette, be it predator or rival, would be painted long before it could strike. The darkness beyond the fire's glow was not empty. It was a realm of potential threats. Our forebears did not conquer their fear of the dark. They strategically avoided its most dangerous expressions. They sought the light of the moon and stars not for romance, but for reconnaissance. Does this mean our comfort in open, well-lit spaces is not just a preference, but an echo of a survival strategy etched into our collective memory? In our modern world, we have engineered a perpetual daylight. Motion sensor lights blaze to life at the slightest disturbance, and security cameras with night vision peer tirelessly into the shadows we've banished. We have built a civilization that glows, yet the ancient circuitry within us remains stubbornly active. A child still pleads for a nightlight, their fear dismissed as a phase they will outgrow. An adult, walking home alone, will instinctively choose the well-lit street over the shortcut through the dark alley, their pace quickening without a thought. We have not eliminated the threat of the dark. We have merely outsourced our vigilance to technology. But the primal flinch, the quickening pulse, persists. Why does this anxiety cling to us so tenaciously, even when our environment is, by all measurable standards, safe? A skeptic might ask, if the human eye is incapable of seeing in total darkness, why not simply shut down the entire alert system? Why maintain such an expensive, energy-draining state of anxiety over an unknowable void? Wouldn't a more efficient organism simply accept its blindness and conserve its energy? This overreaction seems on the surface like a design flaw, but what if this heightened sensitivity is the very point? What if the system is designed not to respond to clear and present danger, but to the profound and paralyzing uncertainty of the unknown? The cost of a false alarm, a few moments of heightened stress, is negligible compared to the ultimate cost of a single, real threat missed in the shadows. Is it possible that our fear is not an error, but a calculated, evolutionary wager? The answer to this paradox may not lie in the world around us, but within the most fundamental blueprint of our being. It might be written into the very code that builds us, a whisper from the past, carried not in memory, but in molecule. Perhaps you were not just taught to fear the dark. Perhaps, in a sense much deeper than metaphor, you were born with it. What if the very intensity of your reaction to that black corridor is not a choice, but an inheritance? Emerging research suggests that individuals who exhibit a powerful physiological response to darkness may carry a specific genetic variant linked to the amygdala, the almond-shaped region of the brain that acts as the primary processor for fear and emotional memory. This implies that the tendency to perceive the unseen as a threat could be, to a significant degree, innate. It is a predisposition, a setting on the dial of your nervous system, calibrated by your ancestry. Your amygdala might be a watchman passed down through generations, one who has learned to err on the side of caution. So, when your heart hammers in the silence of an empty house, Is it your own fear you are feeling, or the accumulated vigilance of 1,000 generations who survived to see the dawn? The child, safe in a city that never truly sleeps, has never known the absolute black of a wilderness night. The glow of a street lamp bleeds through the blinds, a constant humming reassurance. There has been no attack, no trauma whispered in the dark corners of a childhood bedroom. Yet, each night, a small hand reaches out to click the switch on the bedside lamp, casting a warm, domestic pool of light against the encroaching shadows. The question is not one of learned behavior. Not really. It feels deeper, more ancient. Is it a lesson taught, or a memory carried in the very code of being? Is the fear of the dark something we acquire, or something we inherit? This quiet dread seems to hum in the wiring of the brain itself. Deep within the temporal lobes, two almond-shaped clusters of neurons, the amygdala, stand as a timeless sentinel. In the modern human, as in our most distant ancestors, this is the seat of fear, the alarm bell that clangs at the first sign of threat. Neuroscience reveals that in those of us for whom the dark feels particularly oppressive, the amygdala is not broken, but perhaps too finely tuned. It hums with a higher baseline of activity, a watchfulness that borders on paranoia. When the lights go out, it doesn't simply register an absence of light. It interprets it as a presence of potential danger. The rustle of a curtain becomes the footfall of an intruder. The sigh of the house settling transforms into the breath of something waiting just beyond the door. This heightened sensitivity may be written, in part, by our genes. Variations in genes like COMT, which help regulate neurotransmitters like dopamine, can influence our anxiety threshold. Some of us are, quite literally, genetically predisposed to listen more intently to the whispers of our own primal alarm system, to feel the weight of the void more acutely than others. The fear feels personal, a unique flaw, but its blueprint might be a universal heirloom. We can trace the ghost of this inheritance back through millennia, not in DNA sequences, but in ochre and charcoal on cold stone walls. In the deep caves of Europe, our Paleolithic ancestors left a testament to their own negotiations with darkness. The images are often celebrated as the first stirrings of human art, a magnificent explosion of symbolic thought. But look closer at the scenes depicted. A bison, its body bristling with spears, collapses not under a bright sun, but within the confines of a dark enclosed space, perhaps a stylized representation of a cave or a night hunt. A human figure, stylized and fragile, lies prone before a wounded beast, a moment of peril frozen in time. These are not just scenes of survival, they are scenes of vulnerability, often situated in a context that implies the night, the deep forest, the unknown. The artists chose the most profound darkness available to them, the absolute silent black of the cave's deepest chambers, as the canvas for their most potent fears. This was not a random selection. It suggests a collective obsession, a shared narrative of danger that was intimately tied to the absence of light. The cave itself becomes a metaphor for the night, a shared psychic space where the tribe's anxieties could be projected, examined, and perhaps, in the very act of depiction, momentarily contained. This ancient thread continues into the modern age, woven into the fabric of a clinical diagnosis, nyctophobia, an intense and irrational fear of the dark. What is most telling about this condition is its tendency to run in families, appearing in children who have no personal negative experiences to justify it. A child raised in safety and comfort can be gripped by a paralyzing terror when the sun goes down, a terror that seems to have no origin story. It is as if the fear itself is the heirloom, passed down not through stories, but through a more direct biological line. The child's nightlight is not fighting a monster they have seen. It is holding at bay the ghost of a monster their ancestors knew all too well. The dark becomes a screen upon which a deeply ingrained genetic memory is projected, the memory of being not the hunter but the hunted. Yet, if this fear is so deeply encoded, so fundamental to our biological and cultural history, Why does it not hold universal sway? Why do some individuals not only overcome this primal tremor but actively seek out the very darkness that terrifies others? The poet, the astronomer, the mystic, they all step into the night not with trepidation but with a sense of anticipation. For them, the dark is not a blanket that smothers, but a veil that reveals. It is the condition for seeing the stars, for quiet introspection, for a connection to something larger than the self. This divergence presents a fascinating paradox. It suggests that our genetic inheritance is not a prison sentence but a set of raw materials. The same amygdala that screams a warning can be taught, through experience and reason, to lower its voice. The ancient fear is real, but it is not the whole truth. It is a foundational layer, a deep, resonant chord in the symphony of human consciousness. But the melody we play over it is ours to compose. Perhaps the answer lies in recognizing that darkness itself is neutral. It is an empty vessel. Our genetics may predispose us to fill that vessel with monsters, with the echoes of ancestral predators, but the human mind possesses another, equally profound capacity, the power of imagination. And so the true terror and the true allure of the dark may not be what it hides from us, but what it reveals about us. If the fear is inscribed in our genes and painted on our cave walls, is the darkness merely a canvas for our deepest anxieties? Or could it also be the raw material for our most profound creations? What happens when we stop running from the shadows and instead, like those ancient artists, decide to walk deliberately into the deepest part of the cave to meet what we have projected there? Deep within the earth, where the sun's memory fades to nothing, the air grows still and cold. The flicker of a torch, fed by animal fat, throws frantic shadows against the ancient rock. This is Altamira, in northern Spain, a cathedral of stone sealed for millennia. The light dances across the ceiling, and suddenly they emerge from the darkness, a herd of bison, rendered in stunning ochre and charcoal, their muscles tensed, their forms bursting with a vitality that defies the passage of 15,000 years. Alongside them, the stark, negative imprints of human hands pressed against the rock and blown over with pigment stand as permanent, silent witnesses. But why here? Why venture into this profound, dangerous darkness, a realm of cave bears and suffocating silence, to create such breathtaking art? And why do some of these images, particularly those of stalking lions and wounded beasts, send a primal shiver down the spine? A feeling that is less about admiration and more about an ancient, shared dread. The answer may begin not in the cave, but within the architecture of our own minds. Modern biology reveals a curious bias in the human brain, a negativity bias sharpened by low light. In dim conditions, our primal processors, the amygdala, become hypervigilant. They are designed to prioritize the perception of threat, to sear potential dangers into our memory with greater clarity than moments of peace. A shape lurking in the shadows is granted precedence over a smiling face in the sun. A sudden noise in the night echoes in the mind long after the dawn. This is a fundamental survival mechanism, a legacy from a time when the night was not a time of rest, but a domain of unseen predators. Was the cave, then, the ultimate amplifier of this instinct? By painting in the absolute dark, illuminated only by a trembling flame, were these early artists deliberately engaging with the very neurological pathways that encode fear? The art itself becomes a memory tool, but one designed to remember not just the animal, but the visceral feeling of the hunt, the ever-present risk of becoming the hunted. This biological predisposition finds its echo in the cold, hard data of archaeology. Altamira and its sister sanctuary, Lascaux in France, are not simply galleries of peaceful herbivores. They are populated by the predators of the Paleolithic world. Here we find the cave lion, muscles coiled, teeth bared in a silent snarl. There, a woolly rhinoceros charges with unmistakable aggression. The handprints, often clustered in recesses and difficult-to-reach areas, feel less like signatures and more like territorial markers or warnings, a primal "I was here" etched into the most perilous parts of the underworld. The locations of these paintings are equally telling. They are not at the sun-drenched entrances, but deep within the labyrinthine passages, in chambers that required crawling through narrow tunnels, often while contending with a lack of oxygen. This was not a casual afternoon of painting. It was a deliberate, difficult pilgrimage into the belly of the earth. Does this suggest that the darkness itself was an essential ingredient? That the act of creation was inseparable from the environment of fear, transforming the cave from a mere shelter into a sacred space for confronting the most potent forces of their world, both the beasts outside and the terrors within? This ancient dialogue with darkness is not a relic of the past. It is a thread that runs unbroken into the heart of modern psychology. Our fascination with horror films, with supernatural thrillers, with surreal art that distorts reality, is a direct descendant of the Altamira torchlight. We pay to sit in darkened rooms and have fear meticulously manufactured for us on a screen. We are drawn to stories of things that go bump in the night, to creatures that lurk just beyond the edge of vision. This attraction is not a sign of sickness, but perhaps a form of cognitive calibration. By safely experiencing fear within a controlled environment, a cinema, the pages of a book, an art gallery, we are, in a way, rehearsing our own responses. We are engaging in a modern ritual not so different from our ancestors, using narrative and image to map the contours of our deepest anxieties, to touch the void and then return to the light, unscathed, but somehow wiser. Is the shudder we feel when watching a horror movie a cultural construct, or is it the faint, genetic echo of a much older shudder, felt deep in a lightless cave? Yet, a compelling counter-argument arises. What if we have misinterpreted the shiver entirely? If these vivid depictions were part of a spiritual ritual, a form of sympathetic magic intended to grant power over the animals, or a celebration of a successful hunt, do they truly reflect naked fear? Or are they in fact evidence of its opposite, a profound attempt to domesticate it? To draw a predator on the wall is to capture its essence, to pin it down with pigment and line. It is an act of defiance. By rendering the thing they feared most, our ancestors may have been seeking to strip it of its power, to transform the uncontrollable terror of the night into a known quantity, a symbol that could be understood and ultimately mastered. The art, then, becomes a weapon against chaos. The cave is not a place to cower, but a sanctuary for gaining control. Is the blood-red bison a monument to fear or a declaration of victory over it? This duality, the simultaneous expression of terror and the attempt to conquer it, leads us to a deeper, more unsettling question. What was the true nature of the monster in the dark? If the purpose of these deep earth galleries was to confront and codify a primordial anxiety, what was the source of that anxiety so powerful it demanded such elaborate, dangerous rituals? The painted predators on the walls are clear and tangible, but could they have been stand-ins for a more elusive, more intelligent, and far more terrifying threat? The answer might not lie in the bones of prey animals, but in the bones of our own kind. The true horror that stalked the night may have been one that walked on two legs. What if the deepest fear, the one that truly shaped the human psyche, was the memory of a different kind of bloodshed, not of bison brought down by spears, but of kin slaughtered in their sleep by other humans? The moon had abandoned the sky. In the deep, velvet blackness, the only sounds were the rhythmic breathing of the tribe and the dying embers of the central fire. They slept huddled together, a single organism of warmth and trust, their dreams woven from the day's hunt and the scent of the earth. Then, a sound sliced through the silence, not the familiar call of a night bird or the rustle of a foraging creature, but a single sharp exhalation that was neither human nor wholly animal. It was a sound that bypassed the conscious mind and spoke directly to the spine. By the time the first gray light of dawn touched the horizon, the settlement was silent in a new, absolute way. Only the deep impressions of unfamiliar feet in the mud and dark, congealing stains spreading from the huddled forms remained. No one was left to tell the story. The narrative was written only in the aftermath, a brutal ledger of absence. This is not merely a scene from a forgotten past. It is a ghost that haunts our very biology. When you startle awake in the dead of night, your heart hammering against your ribs for no reason you can name, you are perhaps feeling the faintest echo of that ancient alarm. The modern explanation begins in the labyrinth of the brain. A sudden, unexpected noise in the night, a creak of the floorboards, a distant siren, triggers an immediate surge in the vestibular cortex. This region, normally associated with balance and spatial orientation, goes on high alert even as we sleep, acting as a primitive sentry. It floods the system with adrenaline, a chemical relic of survival, preparing the body for a threat it cannot yet see. Your rational mind, fumbling for the light switch, calls it irrational fear, but your body, a vessel of deep time, knows it as a protocol for potential extinction. It is a physiological memory of a time when the dark was not empty, but full. The soil itself holds the evidence for this ingrained terror. At Jebel Sahaba in Sudan, a grave site dating back 13,000 years, tells a story of profound violence. The skeletons of dozens of men, women, and children bear the marks of a coordinated attack, spear points embedded in bone, skulls fractured by clubs, arrow wounds that suggest a frantic, desperate defense. The positioning of the bodies, the nature of the injuries, and the lack of any formal burial ritual point to a single, horrifying conclusion. This was not a ritualistic killing or a skirmish between rivals. It was a massacre, likely launched under the cover of darkness, a swift and brutal eradication of an entire group. These are not just bones. They are a fossilized moment of collective trauma. The silent screams seem to echo across the millennia, a stark reminder that the fear of the nighttime raid is not a paranoid fantasy, but a historical reality etched into our ancestral record. This deep-seated anxiety persists, a phantom limb of a collective psyche that remembers being prey. In our modern world, safe behind deadbolts and illuminated by streetlights, the fear should have faded. Yet, insomnia, nighttime anxiety, and that inexplicable jolt from sleep are remarkably common. We lie in the dark, our minds conjuring shadows into monsters, our bodies tense with a vigilance that feels out of place in a climate-controlled room. Is this a direct inheritance? A genetic memory of those long-ago nights of terror? Or is it something we have taught ourselves, a cultural artifact passed down through generations of stories? Our campfire tales, our myths, our horror films, they all paint the night as a realm of danger. We have, in a sense, weaponized our own history, using narrative to keep the old fears alive. We have taken a real historical vulnerability and woven it into the very fabric of our culture, ensuring that each new generation learns to mistrust the dark. But if this fear is purely a cultural construct, a story we tell to explain a primal shudder, then why is the reaction so universal, so visceral, so immune to logic? And more intriguingly, why do the creatures who share our homes, who have lived alongside us for millennia, not seem to share the same specific dread? The dog may bark at a noise, but it settles back to sleep. The cat's eyes gleam with purpose in the blackness. They are not paralyzed by the abstract horror of the unseen. For them, the night is a different landscape, one they are equipped to navigate. This divergence points to a deeper truth about our own vulnerability. Our fear may be rooted in a specific, profound loss, not just the loss of safety, but the loss of a way of seeing. What if the true trauma of that moonless night was not just the violence itself, but the terrifying realization of our own blindness? We are a species of the day. While our ancestors' predators and competitors possessed senses honed for the dark, human eyes are nearly useless in the deep of night. The pupil can only dilate so far. The rod cells on our retinas are easily overwhelmed. This created a fundamental asymmetry that our brains registered as the highest level of danger, the state of being unable to see while knowing, with chilling certainty, that you could be seen. To be observed from the shadows by eyes you cannot meet is to be reduced to an object, a potential victim. This imbalance is a cognitive wound. The night, for early humans, was not simply the absence of light. It was the presence of a perceptual disadvantage so severe that it could mean the difference between life and death. The adrenaline rush, the hypervigilance, the pounding heart, these are not just reactions to a potential threat. They are the body's desperate attempt to compensate for a sensory void, to create a map of the unseen through intuition and fear. So when we lie awake, hearts racing at an unidentifiable sound, are we reacting to a story we've been told, or are we tapping into a much older, more visceral memory of being watched? Is our insomnia a modern ailment, or is it the ancient, watchful part of our mind refusing to stand down, still guarding the tribe against a threat that now only exists in the silent museum of our DNA? The evidence is written in our nerves and in the soil, but the final verdict remains elusive. Perhaps the question is not whether the memory is real, but what we are truly seeing when we stare into the dark and feel a chill that reason cannot dispel. What watches back from the darkness with eyes that are not ours? The air is cool and smells of pine resin and damp earth. You are miles from the nearest electric light, and the campfire has dwindled to a bed of pulsating embers. The world has been reduced to a monochrome of deep blues and impenetrable blacks. You fumble for your flashlight, its beam a frail yellow cone that seems to push back the darkness only with great effort. Then the battery begins to die. The light flickers, weakens, and the shadows at the edge of the clearing seem to lean in, pressing closer. You swing the fading beam in a slow, desperate arc, and for a fraction of a second, it catches 2 points of reflected light low to the ground in the thicket. They are not mere specks. They are orbs, luminous and unblinking. There is no sound, no rustle of leaves, no snap of a twig. But you know, with a certainty that bypasses logic and settles deep in your gut, that you are being watched. This sensation is an ancient inheritance. It is a whisper from a time when our ancestors were not the masters of the planet, but one species among many, navigating a world that did not sleep when the sun went down. Our night blindness is a profound biological fact. The human eye lacks a structure called the tapetum lucidum, a mirrored layer behind the retina that acts like a natural light amplifier. In the eyes of a cat, a tiger, or an owl, light passes through the retina, bounces off this mirror, and passes through the light-sensitive cells a second time, effectively doubling their chance of capturing a photon. To these creatures, a moonlit night is as clear as our overcast day. We, by contrast, are plunged into a state of near-total blindness. Our rods, the cells responsible for low-light vision, are overwhelmed, our depth perception vanishes, and the world becomes a flat, murky canvas of uncertainty. The eyes in the darkness see a world we cannot perceive, a parallel reality unfolding just beyond the reach of our senses. This vulnerability is etched not just in our biology, but in the very artifacts we have left behind. Archaeological digs at ancient settlements, from the earliest Neolithic villages to fortified hilltops, reveal a consistent pattern of nocturnal anxiety. Spear points are not merely found. They are found clustered near the likely entrances of dwellings. Pit traps and defensive palisades are not oriented for a daytime assault, but for an incursion under the cover of darkness. The universal human preference for sleeping in elevated places, on platforms, in trees, or in caves with a single defensible entrance speaks volumes. It is a testament to a long, unbroken history of being prey, of huddling together for warmth and safety, while unseen threats circled just beyond the firelight. Our ancestors did not fear the dark itself. They feared what their blindness allowed to approach, unseen and unheard. One might assume that in our modern age, with our dominion over the planet seemingly absolute, this primal fear would have faded. Yet it has simply shapeshifted, finding expression in our technology. The security camera with its ghostly green night vision, the motion sensor that triggers a floodlight, the infrared scope, these are all sophisticated prosthetics for our deficient eyes. They are our attempt to build a tapetum lucidum for our homes and cities. This technological arms race against the night is a silent admission that for all our progress, we have never truly evolved beyond that fundamental weakness. We have not conquered the night. We have merely outsourced our vigilance to silicon and circuitry. We still feel the need to see what watches us, to strip away the advantage we cede every time the sun disappears. This leads to a curious paradox. If we are, in fact, blind in the deep dark, then what is it that we are so afraid of? Logically, the absence of visual stimuli should be peaceful, a blank slate. A room with the lights off is just a room. A forest at night is just a forest. The terror should stem from a tangible threat, the gleam of eyes, the sound of a growl. But often, the most profound fear arrives in the utter silence, in the complete absence of any signal. The fear is not of what we see, but of what we might see if we could, and more terrifyingly, of what our mind conjures to fill the void. The brain abhors an information vacuum. When sensory input ceases, the internal projector switches on. And so, the true monster in the darkness is not necessarily the predator with the reflective eyes. It is the architecture of our own imagination. The darkness becomes a screen upon which we project our deepest anxieties, our unspoken guilts, our most primal fears of the unknown. The mind, deprived of external data, turns inward, sifting through the archives of memory and nightmare to populate the emptiness with shapes. That faint rustle becomes a stalking beast. The creak of a branch becomes a footstep. The sigh of the wind becomes a whispered threat. The imagined horror is often far more potent and personalized than any real creature could be, because it is tailored from the fabric of our own psyche. It knows our weaknesses because it is our weakness, given form and shadow. But if the waking night is a canvas for our fears, what happens when the body itself surrenders to the dark, when the mind disconnects entirely from the external world and descends into its own uncharted depths? The eyes in the bushes are one thing, but what of the eyes that watch us from within? You wake in the deep, still hours of the night, the silence of your room a stark contrast to the chaos you've just escaped. A cold sweat traces a path down your spine. The details of the dream are already fraying at the edges, dissolving into the fog of wakefulness. But the visceral echo remains. You are being pulled into a space of absolute darkness, a labyrinth with no exit. You never saw the face of what pursued you. You only knew, with a certainty that chilled your blood, that it was always just behind you. This is the territory of the nightmare, a universal human experience that feels anything but universal when you're trapped within it. It is a private cinema of dread, where the most primal parts of ourselves take the stage. But what if this deeply personal terror is not merely a random misfiring of neurons? What if it is a profound biological and anthropological inheritance, a story written in the very architecture of our brains and the oldest layers of our cultures? The first layer of this story is written in the language of biology, in the quiet storm of the sleeping brain. Nightmares most often erupt during rapid eye movement, REM sleep, a phase far from peaceful rest. Here, the body is largely paralyzed, a safety mechanism to prevent us from acting out our dreams. But the brain is electric, buzzing with activity that rivals wakefulness. The amygdala, the ancient almond-shaped cluster of neurons that serves as our alarm system, is particularly active. It is the seat of fear, the trigger for fight or flight. In the landscape of a nightmare, the amygdala is a conductor without an orchestra, playing symphonies of panic in response to a threat that has no physical form. The darkness you flee in the dream is not just an absence of light. It is a neurological representation of anxiety itself, a shadow cast by emotional turmoil. The feeling of being trapped, of a presence closing in, is the brain's internal weather report, mapping a storm of stress onto a narrative canvas. Is the nightmare, then, simply the brain's way of housekeeping, of processing the emotional residue of the day? Yet, humanity has never been content with purely biological explanations for such potent experiences. Long before we had fMRI scanners, we had stories. Archaeology and anthropology reveal that across ancient and indigenous cultures, the black dream, the encounter with shadowy figures, the sensation of being pinned down, the journey into a dark cave or forest, was rarely dismissed as meaningless neural noise. It was often interpreted as a message, a visitation, or a warning from the spirit world. The Kung people of the Kalahari speak of malevolent spirits that sit on the chest of sleepers, causing suffocation and terror. In medieval Europe, the figure of the incubus or succubus was blamed for similar nocturnal assaults. In ancient Mesopotamia, bad dreams were thought to be caused by demons and required specific rituals and prayers for protection. These narratives, though separated by continents and centuries, share a striking commonality. The dark dream is a threshold experience, a point of contact with a realm that is both external and deeply threatening. Could it be that these cultural interpretations are not mere superstitions, but ancient, intuitive attempts to name a universal, terrifying phenomenon? Modern psychology offers a bridge between the biological mechanism and the cultural myth. It gives this phenomenon a clinical name: sleep paralysis. This is the precise moment when the boundaries between worlds grow thin. It occurs when a person becomes consciously aware while still in the REM state, while the body's paralytic mechanism is still fully engaged. You are, in a sense, awake inside a sleeping body. The brain, scrambling to make sense of this contradiction, an alert mind in an unresponsive vessel, often projects the feeling of dread into a sensory hallucination. The paralysis becomes the weight of a malevolent presence. The darkness of the room becomes a looming, intelligent shadow. The feeling of a presence, the pressure on the chest, the auditory hallucinations of footsteps or whispers, these are the core ingredients of the experience reported by people from Tokyo to Toronto, from metropolises to remote villages. The motif is global, transcending cultural boundaries. This universality presents a fascinating paradox. If these experiences are simply the result of a glitch in the brain's sleep-wake cycle, why do they so consistently generate the same narrative elements? The shadowy figure, the malevolent intent, the crushing weight? Why would a biological malfunction feel so intentional? Why would a purely random event, time and again, craft a story with such a similar villain? It is a question that lingers, unsettling the neat borders of scientific explanation. Perhaps the brain's glitch is not creating the monster from nothing, but rather giving form to something that was already there, a deep-seated template of fear waiting in the neural pathways. Perhaps the human brain is not just generating random noise, but reflecting something far older. It may be echoing a primordial fear, an ancient script for survival written in the earliest chapters of our species. This fear was not born in the safety of modern bedrooms, but in a world where the darkness was not empty, but full of very real teeth and claws. It is a fear that has never needed a name, because every one of us has felt its breath on the back of our neck. But if this fear is so deeply ingrained, so fundamental to our wiring, where does it begin? Does it wait for us in the cultural stories we are told, or is it already present, a silent passenger in the cradle? If the nightmare is a universal language, who speaks it first? The last click of the lamp plunges the room into a velvet blackness. For a moment, there is only the soft sound of breathing, the rustle of sheets, then a small voice, tight with a terror that seems too large for its tiny source, pierces the silence. "Mommy, don't go." The 4-year-old's eyes are wide, fixed not on the door, but on the space beneath her bed, a void that, moments ago in the light, was home to nothing more than a stray sock and a forgotten stuffed rabbit. "There's someone under there," she whispers, her certainty absolute. No one has told her ghost stories. No shadowy figures have flickered across a television screen. The fear arrived uninvited, a silent passenger on the night air. So, what unseen teacher instructed this child? To be afraid. This primal shudder at the loss of light is a universal chapter in the story of childhood. It feels instinctive, a hardwired alarm that screams long before the rational mind can form a counter-argument. And perhaps it is. Nestled deep within the brain, the amygdala, our ancient sentinel, operates on a logic far older than reason. In a child, whose neural pathways are still being paved, this almond-shaped cluster is particularly vigilant, reacting with a surge of cortisol and adrenaline to the most fundamental of uncertainties, the unseen. Darkness is the ultimate ambiguity. It strips away the visual data that the young brain is desperately learning to process, leaving behind a canvas for the imagination to paint with its worst-case scenarios. This isn't a flaw, but a feature, a crude, powerful defense mechanism against potential threats that haven't yet been identified. The cry in the night might be the modern echo of a vital prehistoric reflex. When you cannot see what lies beyond the firelight, it is safer to assume the worst. Is the fear of the dark, then, simply the price of a nervous system built for survival in a dangerous world? Yet, if this fear is purely biological, why do cultures across the globe feel compelled to give it a name and a shape? Folklore and tradition are not creators of this dread so much as masterful curators, tapping into a deep, pre-existing wellspring. From the Baku of Japan that devours nightmares to the bogeyman lurking in Western closets, these entities share a common habitat, the shadows. Grandmothers in the Vietnamese countryside might speak of the ong ke, hiding in dark corners, while stories from the deep forests of Europe warn of creatures that stalk the unwary after sundown. These narratives are not random. They are cultural artifacts that resonate because they align with an instinct we already possess. They provide a face for the formless anxiety, transforming the abstract terror of the unknown into a specific, albeit monstrous, adversary. Does this external storytelling merely exploit a biological vulnerability, or does it serve a purpose, teaching children a simplified, symbolic version of a very real lesson about the dangers that darkness once held? Modern psychology observes this phenomenon not as a pathology, but as a predictable developmental stage, typically emerging between the ages of 2 and 6. It is a time when the child's cognitive world is expanding explosively. They are learning about absence and presence, reality and fantasy, but their minds have not yet developed the filters to neatly separate them. A fear that appears spontaneously, without any external trigger, suggests something emerging from within, what some psychologists tentatively label as a primitive instinct. It is the psyche's own projection, a necessary and normal part of growing a mind complex enough to conceive of things that are not immediately present. The monster under the bed is, in a strange way, a milestone. It signifies a brain powerful enough to imagine a threat, even if it cannot yet logically dismiss one. So, is this internal genesis the final proof of an innate, inherited fear? But then, a complicating whisper. What of the child who shows no such fear? The one who toddles confidently into a dark room, who laughs at the shadows dancing on the wall? If the instinct were universal and absolute, such exceptions would not exist. Their existence forces us to consider the intricate dance between nature and nurture, between the raw material of our biology and the sculpting hands of experience and temperament. Is the difference one of innate courage, or an environment that has, somehow, conveyed a greater sense of security? Perhaps it is a matter of individual neural sensitivity, where some amygdalae are simply less eager to sound the alarm. The fearless child challenges the neatness of the instinct argument, suggesting that what we call a primal fear might be more of a potential, a seed that requires certain conditions to sprout into a full-grown phantom. The answer, then, may not lie in the darkness itself, but in what the darkness conceals. The child is not afraid of the absence of light. She is afraid of the presence she imagines within it. Her fear has an object, however vague. Someone. This specific imagery is the key. It points away from an abstract fear of the void and toward a fear of a particular kind of occupant. It is not the shadow she fears, but the possibility of the predator that uses the shadow as its cloak. This something has been given countless names by our ancestors across millennia.
a shape-shifting specter of dread that has always shared the night with us. They called it a demon, a spirit, a monster. But perhaps its oldest, most enduring name, whispered in the genetic memory of our species, is the tiger. For what is more terrifying than a creature of perfect silence and power, whose stripes mimic the play of light and shadow, whose approach is undetectable until the final, lethal moment? The fear of the dark, in its purest form, might not be a fear of emptiness, but a fear of the eyes that are watching us from within it. And if
that is the case, then the stories we tell our children are not mere fictions, but distant, distorted echoes of a very real historical truth. Could the universal monster under the bed be, in its original form, a predator we once had very good reason to fear? The night holds a different kind of silence. It is not an absence of sound, but a presence of listening. In the dense, humid jungles of Vietnam, this listening is given a name, Ong Ba Muoi, the Lord of the Forest, the tiger that walks on silent paws and sees with suns for eyes. In the villages nestled at the foot of the Himalayas, the same presence is not a monster, but a divine vehicle, the mount of the goddess Durga, a sliver of ferocity harnessed to cosmic power. And in the ancient folklore of China, the tiger is a jing, a spirit of the shadows, an essence of the mountain's dark heart. How is it that the same form, striped in shadow and flame, emerges from the collective imagination of cultures an ocean apart? Is this a coincidence of myth, or are we listening to a far older story, one whispered not in words, but in the very chemistry of our blood? Perhaps the answer begins not in the realm of stories, but in the deep, cold archives of prehistory. For the majority of our existence as a species, Homo sapiens was not the planet's apex predator. We were a clever, bipedal morsel on a menu populated by creatures of nightmare and muscle. The saber-toothed cat with daggers for teeth, the giant cave lion, a force of nature capable of dragging a bison into its den, the massive, stealthy lynx. These were the landlords of our world. The dark was their domain. Our diurnal eyes were useless against the velvet blackness where they reigned. The fear of glowing eyes in the deep gloom, of a sudden crushing weight and the snap of vertebrae, was not a phobia. It was a fundamental survival-level reality. This primal terror, this deep-seated knowledge of being prey, may be more than just a cultural memory. It might be etched into us through the subtle mechanisms of epigenetics, where the profound stresses experienced by our ancestors leave chemical marks on our DNA, subtly tuning our nervous systems to resonate with ancient dangers. The quickening pulse at a twig's snap in a dark wood, the involuntary freeze at an ambiguous shape. Are these our personal fears? Or are they the echoes of a million ancestral heartbeats, suddenly silenced? This ancient conversation between predator and prey is scrawled across the earliest canvases of human expression. Long before we built cities or wrote laws, we painted our fears and our reverence onto cave walls. In the flickering torchlight of Chauvet or Lascaux, among the majestic aurochs and charging horses, we find the predators, the lion, the bear, the hyena, and in the petroglyphs of ancient agricultural societies, just as humanity was tentatively bending nature to its will, the tiger appears. These were not simple depictions of local fauna. They were attempts to capture a power, to give form to the uncontrollable force that lurked beyond the firelight. The myths of these early peoples are saturated with the awareness that they were not yet masters of their environment. The tiger became more than an animal. It was a symbol of the wild itself, untamable, majestic, and deadly. It was the embodiment of the night's sovereignty over the day. Did these early artists and storytellers seek to appease the beast, to understand it, or simply to acknowledge the terrifying truth of their own vulnerability? The legacy of this deep-time fear persists, not in campfire tales, but in the private theaters of our minds. In the quiet offices of modern therapists, a common thread emerges in the dreams of those suffering from nocturnal panic disorders. They speak not of tigers, for most have never seen one, but of being chased through endless darkness by a formless entity. They describe a crushing weight on their chest, the sensation of being stalked, of sharp claws and hot breath. The imagery is archetypal. The brain, in its distress, reaches into the oldest layers of its programming and conjures a predator. It dresses the abstract anxiety in the specific visceral costume of a chase that defined our species for millennia. This suggests that the fear of the dark is not a fear of the absence of light, but a fear of what the light once protected us from. When the modern mind unravels, does it default to our most ancient and fundamental nightmare? Yet the story is not so simple, for there exists a fascinating counterpoint, a wrinkle in this elegant narrative of inherited terror. There are communities, like the Idu-Mishmi people in the forests of Arunachal Pradesh, or certain tribes in the Sundarbans mangrove swamps, who live in intimate daily proximity to tigers. Their lives are intertwined with the great cat. They share its territory, hear its roars, and see its tracks with a frequency that would paralyze an outsider. And yet, for many within these cultures, the night does not hold the same paralyzing dread. Their fear is specific, knowledgeable, and respectful, not a generalized, free-floating anxiety. It is a practical awareness, not a primal phobia. Does this mean the genetic memory theory is flawed? Or does it suggest that our relationship with fear is not fixed, but is shaped by a constant, active dialogue with the object of that fear? Is it possible that the ghost of the predator only haunts us when we no longer have to look it in the eye? That the most potent fear is not born from confrontation, but from the space left by absence, a space where imagination grows unchecked? This paradox leads us down a more intriguing path. It suggests that humanity's genius may not lie in avoiding fear, but in alchemizing it. If we cannot escape the shadow of the tiger, perhaps we can invite it in, give it a role, and turn its terrifying energy into a source of strength. What if the dark, rather than being something to flee, was consciously chosen as the ultimate crucible for the human spirit? What happens when a culture decides to ritualize the nightmare? Across the globe, from the initiatory rites of African tribes to the vision quests of Native American cultures, a common theme emerges: the journey into darkness as a prerequisite for maturity. A young person is blindfolded and led deep into the forest, left to spend a night alone in a cave, or sent into the wilderness with nothing but their own courage. This is not a punishment, but a profound test. The external darkness becomes a mirror for the internal unknown. The potential presence of real predators, the snap of a branch, the call of an owl that might be something else, is not an eliminated risk, but an essential part of the ordeal. In the absolute solitude and sensory deprivation of the night, the individual is forced to confront not just the imagined tiger in the bushes, but the roaring, shadowy tiger within, the beast of their own insecurities, terrors, and limitations. This transformation of fear into a rite of passage is a monumental leap in human consciousness. It moves the experience from the realm of passive victimhood to active participation. The dark is no longer a place where things happen to you. It becomes a place where you discover what you are. The ritual provides a container, a sacred context for the chaos of terror. By voluntarily stepping into the belly of the beast, the initiate is, in a symbolic sense, devoured by their own fear and then reborn, having faced it and survived. The fear is not conquered in the sense of being eliminated. It is integrated. The individual learns that courage is not the absence of fear, but the ability to act in spite of its visceral, trembling reality. So, we are left with a tantalizing possibility. The universal myth of the night-prowling tiger may indeed be a fragment of genetic memory, a ghost in our neural machinery, but its persistence might be due to its utility. This ancient fear provided the raw material for one of humanity's most powerful social and psychological technologies, the ritual. The fear of the dark and the predator within it became the very thing that forged identity, community, and resilience. We did not simply inherit a phobia. we inherited a challenge. And in answering that challenge through ceremony, we turned our greatest vulnerability into a source of meaning. But this alchemical process raises a deeper, more unsettling question. If we have successfully banished the literal darkness with electric light and insulated ourselves from wild predators with walls of concrete and steel, what has become of our ancient ritualized relationship with fear? Have we lost the crucible that once forged our courage, leaving only the raw, untransformed anxiety to echo in the modern night? The forest does not sleep. It breathes, a vast, living entity of rustling leaves and unseen movements. On its edge, a community gathers, their faces illuminated by the flickering light of a single torch. At the center stands a boy of 13, his eyes wide, reflecting the flames. An elder places a blindfold over them, plunging his world into a private, anticipatory darkness. He is turned around 3 times, a gentle but disorienting spin, before being guided into the waiting mouth of the trees. For the next 12 hours, he will sit alone. No light, no food, no comforting voice. The rules are ancient and simple. Endure the night and return at dawn to be recognized as a man. Fail to master the fear, and you will walk back to the village as the boy you were. This is not a punishment, but a ritual, a deliberate communal act of turning fear into a rite of passage. In the absolute blackness, his mind becomes his only companion and his greatest adversary. Every crack of a twig is the footfall of a predator. The whisper of the wind transforms into a chorus of unseen voices. His heart hammers against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the silence. This physiological turmoil is not a flaw in the ritual. It is its very engine. Biologically, the boy's body is entering a state of hyperarousal. The amygdala, the brain's ancient alarm bell, is clanging non-stop, flooding his system with norepinephrine. This neurotransmitter, often overshadowed by its cousin adrenaline, is a potent chemical for survival. It sharpens the senses, making the boy hear the faintest scuttle of an insect, smell the damp earth with unnerving clarity. More crucially, it acts as a highlighter for memory, searing every detail of this terrifying night into the neural pathways of his brain. The darkness, in this context, is not an absence, but a crucible. It becomes an accelerator of evolution, forcing a rapid, visceral upgrade to his survival software. The lesson learned in this panicked state, how to sit still, how to listen, how to distinguish the wind from a threat, will be indelible. Is fear, then, not just an emotion, but a brutal, efficient teacher? This practice of using the night as a threshold is a thread woven through the tapestry of human history, found in cultures separated by continents and oceans. The Sand people of the Kalahari send young men on solitary vision quests, where the desert's cold, star-filled darkness brings dreams and revelations. The Mentawai of Indonesia see the initiation as a journey to reconnect with the spirits of the forest, a journey that must begin by confronting the primal fear of being alone in their domain. For the Inuit of the Arctic, where the winter night can last for months, the test is one of resilience against the cold and the haunting silence of the ice, proving one can provide and protect even when the sun abandons the world. These rituals, diverse in their specifics, share a common architecture. They create a sacred container for terror. The community sanctions the fear, gives it a name and a purpose. It is not a random, debilitating event, but a scheduled ordeal, a door that one must pass through. The darkness is the universal catalyst for this transformation, the great equalizer that reduces everyone to their most vulnerable self, before allowing a new, stronger identity to emerge. Does this communal framing of fear make it easier to bear? Or does it simply give a noble name to a necessary suffering? Modern psychology, for all its clinical language, has stumbled upon a similar truth. In therapies designed to treat phobias and post-traumatic stress, there is a technique known as exposure therapy. The principle is deceptively simple. By gradually and safely exposing an individual to the source of their fear, be it heights, social situations, or in some cases, the triggering solitude of darkness, the brain can learn to dissociate the stimulus from the panic response. The feared object loses its power. In a sterilized therapist's office, a patient might be guided to confront the memory of a traumatic night, to sit with the anxiety until it subsides. The parallel to the ancient initiation ritual is striking. Both processes understand that fear cannot be simply ignored or reasoned away. It must be faced, metabolized, and integrated. The tribal elder and the modern therapist, though speaking different languages, might agree on one fundamental point. To heal or to grow, one must first sit in the dark and listen to what it has to say. But if the goal is integration, not eradication, what does that say about the nature of fear itself? Is it a monster to be slain, or a shadow that must be learned, a permanent tenant in the house of the self? This leads to a necessary counterpoint. The ritual can forge resilience. It can build a formidable strength of character. But does it ever truly erase the fear? Or does it merely teach a form of mastery, a precarious control? The boy who becomes a man may no longer scream at the shadows, but a part of him will always hear the whisper of that long night. The ritual provides tools, breathing, stillness, a remembered courage. But the primal jolt of adrenaline, the quickening of the pulse, remains. It is channeled, perhaps even respected, but never fully exiled. The goal is not to become fearless, but to become skilled in the art of fearing. The ritual is a dance lesson with one's own dread. And if this is the case, then the ceremony in the forest is not an exorcism, but a pact to acknowledge the fear, to give it a designated space to roar, and in doing so, to prevent it from ruling the rest of one's life in invisible ways. So the boy sits, minute by agonizing minute, as the night deepens around him. He battles monsters of his own making and, in doing so, forges the first crude tools of his adulthood. The community waits, knowing that the fear he faces is a necessary inheritance. It is the price of entry into a world that has always been, and will always be, filled with unknowns. The ritual makes the private internal storm of fear a public sanctioned event. But what of those who never learn this dance? What happens to the individual who, through some twist of nature or nurture, lacks this fundamental guiding fear of the dark? In the ancient world, where the night held very real and very sharp teeth, such a person might have been a liability. Their bravado could have led them and others into danger. They would have missed the evolutionary lesson encoded in the terror, and perhaps they simply would not have lived long enough to pass on their genes. If fear is the cradle of our survival, then what is the cost of never having been rocked in it? The night air was cool, carrying the scent of damp earth and the distant sweet rot of fallen fruit. The fire, the tribe's small, defiant sun, crackled and spat embers into the blackness. Its light danced on the faces of the elders, carving deep shadows that flickered with each breath. The stories had been told, the old warnings passed down in hushed tones about things that moved without sound, things whose eyes reflected no light. Most of the group huddled closer, the circle tightening as if for protection. But one young man, his blood still hot with the arrogance of recent strength, only scoffed. He was tired of the old fears, the constant flinching at every rustle in the leaves. He stood up, stretching, and declared to the circle, a wide, mocking grin on his face, that he felt nothing but peace in the dark. He was not afraid. He took a few steps beyond the fire's warm kiss, laughing into the void, a solitary figure challenging the oldest known unknown. The night swallowed his laughter whole, leaving only silence. The next morning, he was gone. No struggle, no cry, just a faint smeared stain on the grass, already browning in the sun, and a single unfamiliar track, a deep three-toed impression, leading away from the camp and into the deep, unknowable heart of the forest. This is not merely a campfire tale, it is a parable written in the language of our very genes. In the grand, unfeeling ledger of natural selection, the price for a lack of fear is often exacted swiftly and finally. The individuals who wandered too far, who slept too soundly, who failed to startle at the crack of a twig were statistically less likely to pass on their genetic code. Theirs was a courage that led to a dead end. The ones who survived, our ancestors, were the ones whose nervous systems were fine-tuned to perceive threat and ambiguity, whose hearts raced at a shape that might be a predator. This deep-seated vigilance, this primal fear of the dark, is not a flaw to be overcome, but a sophisticated survival mechanism honed over millennia. It is a ghost in our machine, a whisper from a time when the night was not a time for rest, but a domain of active, toothy peril. Is our modern anxiety, then, simply the echo of a successful strategy, a genetic memory of those who chose to stay by the fire? We can see the physical manifestation of this collective fear etched into the earth itself. Archaeologists sifting through the remains of ancient settlements find a recurring pattern. The sleeping areas are not haphazard. They are often arranged in deliberate circles, with the remnants of a central hearth acting as the focal point. This was more than a matter of warmth or social convenience. It was a defensive perimeter. The fire was a tool, a weapon against the encroaching dark, and the circle was a fortress of light and community. The sentinel who tended the flames through the night was not just a keeper of comfort, but a guardian of the gene pool, watching for the gleam of eyes in the shadows. This spatial grammar of safety speaks to a universal, deeply ingrained understanding. The night was a time of vulnerability, and survival was a collective enterprise. What does it say about us that our earliest architectures were so often designed as barriers against the dark? This instinct is so fundamental that its absence is considered a neurological anomaly. Modern psychology and neuroscience point to the prefrontal cortex as the brain's chief executive for risk assessment. It is the region that cross-references memory, sensory input, and social cues to generate the feeling of caution. In individuals who genuinely lack a fear of the dark, studies often reveal a disconnect in this very circuitry. It is not bravery in the philosophical sense, but a form of impaired judgment. The internal alarm bell is silent. This can lead to a high-risk profile, where the individual fails to recognize danger signals that are obvious to others. The line between fearless explorer and a vulnerable target, it seems, can be frighteningly thin, a matter of synaptic pathways and chemical balances. Is true courage, then, the conscious act of moving forward in spite of a fully functioning fear response, rather than the absence of that response altogether? Yet history is not solely written by the cautious. This presents a profound paradox. If fear is so essential for survival, how do we account for the individuals throughout time who stared into the abyss and took another step? The explorers who sailed off the edge of the known map, the scientists who challenged dogma, the artists who gave form to the formless. Many of them must have possessed a different relationship with fear. Their lack of fear was not a neurological deficit, but perhaps a powerful, overriding curiosity, or a vision that burned brighter than the surrounding darkness. They were the first to leave the circle of firelight, not out of foolishness, but driven by a force that transcended the primal warning system. They harnessed the anxiety of the unknown and used it as fuel for discovery. So, is the fear of the dark an advantage or a cage? Does it preserve life at the cost of limiting its potential? Perhaps the key to this paradox lies not in the fear itself, but in what the human mind does with it. We are not merely reactive creatures, programmed only to flee or freeze. We are the storytelling animal, the meaning maker. What truly sets us apart may be our unique ability to imagine within our fear. The darkness is, after all, an empty canvas. It is a void of sensory deprivation, and the human mind abhors a vacuum. Into this blankness, we project. We populate the silence with whispers, the shapelessness with monsters, the unknown with narratives. Our fear did not just make us huddle together for safety, it made us create. It gave us myths, gods, and demons. It forced us to invent light, not just fire, but the light of understanding. So, the question shifts. If the darkness is merely an absence, a simple lack of photons, then who filled it with such intricate, terrifying, and compelling shapes? Who gave the shadows a voice? This leads us to a more unsettling thought. What if we are not the only authors of the stories we tell in the dark? What if, while we were crafting our myths of monsters, there were other eyes watching us, perfectly at home in the very environment we found so threatening? For us, the night was a realm of danger. But for a select group of creatures, it is a cradle. They do not fear the dark because they have mastered it. Their very bodies are instruments designed to read the symphony of the night. While we huddled around our fires, telling tales of what might be lurking beyond the glow, the owl was already there, silent and sovereign, turning our deepest fears into its hunting ground. What happens when we consider that the monster in the dark might not be a figment of our imagination, but a real feathered king of the shadows, for whom our fear is simply the scent of prey? In the profound silence of a moonless forest, a single, piercing whistle tears through the fabric of the night. A shadow, softer than the surrounding darkness, detaches itself from a branch and glides noiselessly between the trees. For a moment, you catch the glint of two golden saucers, wide and unblinking, as if the creature is navigating its own personal noon. You, however, stand utterly blind. You can widen your own eyes, strain until they ache, but the world remains a monochrome of deep grays and absolute black. This is the first, most visceral encounter with the otherness of the owl, a creature for whom our limitations do not exist. It lives in a world we can only visit, armed with flashlights and fragile courage. This fundamental asymmetry, this biological divide between daywalkers and night seers, is a story written in the very rods and cones of our eyes, a tale as old as the fear of the dark itself. The biology behind this nightly vision is a masterpiece of evolutionary engineering. While our human eyes are versatile, capable of discerning millions of colors in the bright sun, they are clumsy instruments in the dim. The owl, and other masters of the night, possess a retinal landscape dominated by rod cells, specialized for low-light perception. Where we might have a scattering of these light-sensitive receptors, they have a dense forest, outnumbering ours by 10 or 20 to 1. This allows them to gather every scarce photon, every whisper of starlight filtering through the canopy. But nature added a second marvel, the tapetum lucidum, a mirrored layer behind the retina. Light that passes through the retina once is caught by this biological mirror and bounced back for a second chance at detection. It is this tapetum that creates the eerie, luminous shine of animal eyes in a car's headlights, a ghostly echo of light we cannot see. Their world is not the pitch black of our perception, but a landscape painted in subtle luminescence, where shapes have weight, and movement is as clear as text on a page. So, when the owl's head swivels almost a full circle to lock its gaze upon you, it is not a supernatural act, but a simple, physiological fact. It sees. You are seen, and you are oblivious. This biological reality seeped deep into the human psyche, crystallizing in our oldest stories and superstitions. Across continents and cultures, the owl rarely played the part of a benign neighbor. For the ancient Romans, its call was an omen of impending death, a belief so potent that they would ritually burn the bird to avert disaster. In much of European folklore, it was a familiar of witches, a silent feathered spy for dark forces. Indigenous cultures of the Americas often viewed it as a messenger from the spirit world, a guide for souls passing into the afterlife. Why this universal association with death, misfortune, and the unseen? The answer may lie not in the owl's malevolence, but in that very asymmetry of perception. Early humans, huddled around a flickering fire, would have been acutely aware of a presence they could hear, a soft hoot, the rustle of feathers, but almost never see before it was upon them. The owl became the embodiment of a threat that could observe without being observed, a predator that operated in a dimension just beyond human sensory reach. It was not merely a bird, it was the physical form of a chilling concept, that which watches from the darkness you cannot penetrate. This primal fear has been seamlessly inherited by our modern minds, finding new life in the very stories we tell for thrill. The owl's role in horror films and gothic tales is rarely that of a jump scare monster. Instead, it is an atmospheric anchor, a symbol of pervasive dread. It is the silent witness perched on a gable as a character walks unknowingly into danger. Its call is the soundtrack to a growing unease. This taps directly into a deep-seated psychological vulnerability, the fear of being stalked, of being the subject of a gaze we cannot return. The horror is not in the creature itself, but in the relationship it imposes. It creates a one-way window between our world of limited senses and its world of perfect clarity. We are the prey, frozen in the headlights of a perception we cannot comprehend. Is this fear, then, just a ghost in the machine? A dusty relic from a time when the night held genuine terrors? One could argue that we have, in many ways, conquered the night. We have flipped the asymmetry on its head. Our language and our imagination allowed us to conceptualize light beyond the fire, leading to the torch, the lantern, the electric bulb. Our tool-making ingenuity produced not just weapons, but lenses, telescopes to see the stars, microscopes to see the infinitesimal, and infrared cameras that peel back the curtain of darkness, rendering the nocturnal world in ghostly green and white. We can now observe the owl in its own domain, turning the watcher into the watched. With a smartphone's glow, we banish the immediate shadows from our bedsides. In this age of artificial noon, is our ancient fear of the dark merely an evolutionary hangover, a superstition we should have outgrown? Has our technology finally severed the link between the night and primal terror? But then, a storm knocks out the power grid. The hum of civilization ceases abruptly, and the world is plunged into a blackness so complete it feels solid. The flashlight's battery dies. The phone screen goes black. In that instant, something profound and ancient stirs. The confident, modern human recedes, and a more primal self edges forward. The rustle of leaves outside is no longer just the wind, it is a presence. The creak of the house is no longer settling timber, it is a footstep. The mind, stripped of its technological shields, begins to project shapes and intentions onto the void. This is not a rational response, but a visceral one. It bypasses the cortex and speaks directly to the spine. The lying tools are gone, and what remains is the raw, unmediated interface between a vulnerable animal and the immense, unknowable dark. So what truly happens when our manufactured light vanishes? What part of us, long dormant, awakens to fill the void with imagined monsters and very real chills? If the owl represents a mastery of the physical night, what does our enduring fear reveal about the landscape of our own minds when the sun goes down? When the last artificial light winks out and the world is returned to its original shadowed state, who is it that is truly afraid? Is it the modern human with their complex language and accumulated knowledge? Or is it something much, much older, a tenant deep within the architecture of the brain that never needed light to see its fears? You hear it, just as you're on the cusp of sleep. A faint rustle, a floorboard sigh in the absolute quiet of the house. Your body goes rigid. The breath catches in your throat, a silent primal freeze. For a heartbeat, the world shrinks to that single, ambiguous sound. Then, the familiar voice of reason whispers from the back of your mind. It's nothing. Just the house settling, the wind. You exhale, willing your muscles to relax. But the question lingers, a faint tremor in the calm. If it was truly nothing, why did your entire being scream danger before your logic could even form a sentence? The answer lies not in the shadows of the room, but in the ancient shadows of your own skull. In the profound quiet of night, when the world of sight and social nuance recedes, an older, more fundamental power takes the throne. This is the domain of the lizard brain, the reptilian complex, a legacy etched into our neural architecture from a time long before cities, before language, before the comforting glow of a smartphone screen. It is the first responder, the alarm system wired directly to our survival, and it operates on a timeline that bypasses conscious thought entirely. In the split second between the sound and your rationalization, this ancient sentinel has already assessed the threat, flooded your veins with adrenaline, and prepared your body for one of three primordial commands: freeze, flee, or fight. It is a biological truth that our civilized selves often forget. When the lights go out, we are, in a very real sense, governed by a lizard. This neural inheritance is a ghost in the machine, a whisper from our deep past. For hundreds of thousands of years, the night was not a time for restful sleep in locked homes, but a realm of palpable danger. The darkness was a cloak for predators whose approach was silent and whose intent was final. The human who slept through a twig snap did not live to see the dawn. The one whose lizard brain jolted them awake at the slightest disturbance, whose heart hammered a frantic rhythm of warning, who held their breath to listen more intently, that individual possessed a marginal advantage. That hypervigilance, that hair-trigger startle response was not a disorder. It was an essential feature. It was the difference between being a survivor and being prey. The chill that crawls up your spine in a dark alley, the instinctive pause before stepping into an unlit room, the way your senses seem to sharpen when you can no longer rely on your eyes. These are not irrational quirks. They are the echoes of a successful survival strategy, a neurological heirloom passed down through countless generations, a story written in the very chemistry of fear. In the modern world, this creates a peculiar dissonance. We know, intellectually, that the rustle is the wind and the shape in the corner is a pile of clothes. Modern psychology reveals that for many, the fear of the dark is not a fear of monsters, but a fear of this very loss of control, the unsettling experience of our own body betraying us. The rational mind is a passenger in a vehicle suddenly commandeered by a driver from the Stone Age. The hands tremble, the pulse races, and the conscious self can only watch, a helpless observer to a rebellion staged by its own flesh and blood. We become strangers to ourselves, governed by an instinct we can understand but cannot command. And this is where a tempting counter-argument arises. If the conscious, reasoning cortex is so powerful, if it can build skyscrapers and unravel the genome, then surely it can master this primitive ghost. With enough willpower, with a strong enough grip on logic, an adult should be able to shrug off the childish fear of the dark. So why does the PhD, the CEO, the soldier, all paragons of modern rationality, still sometimes feel that primal clutch of dread when the power fails and the world is plunged into an abyssal black? Why does the ancient alarm still sound so clearly in the most sophisticated of minds? Perhaps the answer is not that we have failed to evolve beyond the lizard brain, but that our modern world has, in a profound and unintended way, made us more vulnerable to it. We have not conquered the night. We have simply banished it, creating a perpetual, artificial day. In doing so, we may have weakened the very faculties we rely on to navigate the darkness, fostering a dependency that leaves us strangely helpless when the lights we built finally flicker and die. We have traded the gradual, earned familiarity with the night for the stark, immediate comfort of the light switch. But what happens to a muscle that is never used? Does it not atrophy? This reliance is our modern covenant, a bargain we made without fully reading the terms. The gentle glow of the street lamp outside our window, the constant hum of electronics with their standby LEDs like a constellation of artificial stars. These are not just conveniences. They are a barrier, a declaration of independence from the natural rhythm of light and dark. For the first time in human history, true darkness has become an anomaly, an inconvenience, a state to be remedied as quickly as possible. We have systematically erased the night from our experience, painting over the primordial black with a wash of incandescent and fluorescent light. We have built a world where the lizard brain is rarely called upon to stand its watch, lulled into a false sense of security by our own ingenuity. The price of this perpetual illumination is a quiet, insidious form of domestication. Consider the sheer disorientation that accompanies a sudden blackout. The confident stride across a familiar room becomes a hesitant shuffle, hands outstretched like a blind man's. The world we knew so well moments before transforms into a landscape of unseen obstacles and unnerving silence. Our technological prosthetics fail, and we are left naked, our senses dulled by disuse. This is more than an inconvenience. It is a glimpse into our own fragility. We have outsourced our security to the power grid, and in the process, we have allowed our innate ability to navigate uncertainty to fade. The same person who can confidently navigate a complex spreadsheet is rendered helpless and anxious in a dark basement. Our competence is conditional, built upon a foundation of light that can vanish in an instant. This erosion extends beyond mere physical navigation. In the absence of natural darkness, we have lost a certain intimacy with a fundamental part of our own planet, and perhaps ourselves. The star-filled sky, once a source of navigation, myth, and profound wonder, is now a diluted spectacle for most, washed out by the light pollution of our cities. The subtle sounds and sensations of the night, the world as perceived by our ancestors, are drowned out by the constant background noise of modern life. We have traded the deep, mysterious tapestry of the natural night for the flat, predictable safety of the illuminated world. But in sanitizing the darkness, have we lost something essential? Have we, in our quest to eliminate fear, also extinguished a source of awe? The street lamp, that singular sentinel of our engineered safety, does not just light a path. It casts a long shadow of dependency. It allows us to forget the ancient pact our species once had with the night, a relationship built on respect, caution, and a hard-won familiarity. We no longer need to listen to the night, to learn its language, to move through it with a cautious grace. We simply flip a switch and it retreats. But this mastery is an illusion. It is the control of a gardener who believes he has conquered the forest because he has planted a lawn. The forest remains, waiting at the edge of the fence, and the ancient instincts to navigate it lie dormant within us, untested and growing weak. So, the next time you find yourself pausing at the threshold of a dark room, your heart giving a faint, involuntary lurch, consider that it is not a sign of weakness, but an echo of a deep and powerful strength. It is the ghost of a survivor reminding you of a world that still exists, just beyond the reach of the nearest switch. The question is not whether we can silence that ghost with more light, but what we become when we stop listening to its ancient cautionary song altogether. If we are so intent on banishing the night, what other essential parts of ourselves might we be leaving in the dark? The city never truly sleeps. It hums, a low-frequency vibration felt in the bones more than heard by the ears, a constant testament to human dominion over nature. A spiderweb of illuminated streets stitches together concrete and glass, creating a galaxy of artificial stars that outshines the cosmos above. We move through these canyons of light with a practiced ease, our footsteps echoing on sidewalks bathed in the orange glow of sodium vapor. The night has been tamed, partitioned, made safe for commerce and conversation. But then, the power fails. It is a sudden, swallowing silence. The hum vanishes, and in its place a void rushes in. The intricate map of the city, once drawn in light, is erased. Traffic lights become blind eyes, and the orderly river of cars coagulates into a tangled, honking metal beast. Pedestrians who moments before strode with purpose now huddle at intersections, their faces illuminated by the ghostly blue of smartphone screens, their confidence seeping away into the newly dark pavement. They hesitate, peering into alleyways that have transformed from passages into portals of the unknown. The modern world, so reliant on its luminous crutch, reveals a profound vulnerability when that crutch is kicked away. This collective stutter, this moment of urban paralysis, is more than an inconvenience. It is a glimpse into a quiet erosion, a story of how the very light that protects us may also be softening the ancient animal within. At the core of this story is a biological betrayal, a silent war waged inside our own skulls. Our bodies are not designed for eternal afternoon. They are governed by a deep primordial rhythm tied to the Earth's rotation, the circadian clock. For millennia, the setting sun was the cue for the brain's pineal gland to begin its sacred work, the secretion of melatonin. This hormone, the chemical embodiment of night, is a gentle command. It lowers body temperature, slows the metabolism, and prepares the mind and body for rest and repair. It is the tide that pulls us inward into the sanctuary of sleep. But artificial light, especially the blue-rich light that dominates our screens and LED streetlights, is a false dawn. It hits the retina and sends a frantic message to the brain. The day is not done. The production of melatonin is suppressed, halted in its tracks. The consequence is a body caught in a state of perpetual jet lag. Our internal clock, once synchronized with the cosmic dance of the sun and moon, is now forced to march to the erratic drum of a society that never powers down. We lose the clean, restorative transition between day and night, activity and rest. But perhaps more insidiously, we lose our familiarity with true darkness. The brain, no longer practicing the nightly ritual of melatonin-induced quietude, forgets the feel of it. The natural, gradual acclimation to the absence of light, the dilation of pupils, the sharpening of other senses, is short-circuited. When true, unexpected, darkness falls. As in a blackout, the system is unprepared. The physiological response is not one of calm adaptation, but of panic, a primal alarm bell ringing in a body that has forgotten how to listen to the night. Has our mastery over the light, then, made us strangers to a fundamental part of our own biological nature? This biological shift is mirrored by a historical one, a trade-off etched into the very pavement of our cities. The widespread installation of gas streetlights in the 19th century was hailed as a triumph of civilization over chaos. It was a promise of safety, a tool to push back against the thieves and villains who operated under the cloak of darkness. Crime rates did, in fact, drop. The night streets were no longer the exclusive domain of the watchman and the felon. They became a space for the respectable citizen. But this safety came with a subtle cost. As the historian Joachim Schleur has noted, the nocturnal citizen emerged, a person comfortable in the artificially lit public sphere, but increasingly disconnected from the natural night. The ancient, hard-won sixth sense that allowed our ancestors to navigate by starlight, to read the nuances of sound and shadow, to feel the texture of the night air on their skin, began to atrophy from disuse. It was a sensory trade. We gained the visual certainty of the illuminated path, but lost the richer, more holistic perception of the environment that comes when sight is not dominant. The night became a visual experience alone, flattening a world that was once perceived in 3 dimensions through sound, smell, and touch. We exchanged a deep, embodied knowledge of the dark for the superficial security of the lit corridor. Is it possible that in banishing the shadows, we also banished a layer of perception, a way of knowing the world that was more intimate, if less precise? This leads to a curious psychological phenomenon, particularly acute in the urban heart. For the city dweller, light has become more than a utility. It is a psychological tranquilizer. It represents order, control, and the constant presence of society. The darkness of a countryside night, while deeper and more absolute, is often perceived as less threatening because it is the expected state. It is natural. But in the city, darkness is an anomaly, a system failure. It signifies a breakdown of the social contract. This is why the reaction to a blackout in a metropolis is often one of disproportionate anxiety compared to a power outage in a rural town. The danger may not be objectively greater, but the psychological shock is. The urbanite's innate vigilance, the low-grade fight-or-flight instinct that is our evolutionary inheritance, has been placated, lulled into a stupor by the constant glare. When the glare vanishes, that instinct doesn't calmly reawaken. It jolts awake in a panic, like a soldier startled from an unguarded sleep. Has our created environment, in its quest to eliminate external threats, inadvertently made us more fragile internally? Yet, to frame this solely as a story of weakening is to ignore the other side of the coin. Is the light a crutch, or is it simply a new tool, enabling a new way of life? Perhaps humanity is not being weakened, but is instead evolving, outsourcing certain survival tasks to our infrastructure. We no longer need to sharpen our night vision because we have created a world where night vision is unnecessary. This is not decay, it is adaptation. The energy we once spent on nocturnal vigilance can now be channeled into other pursuits, into the creation of a 24-hour society, into art and innovation that spills past sunset. The argument could be made that the feeling of vulnerability during a blackout is not a sign of lost instinct, but a rational response to the temporary loss of a critical technology. We feel vulnerable without electricity for the same reason a sailor would feel vulnerable without a compass, because we depend on the tools we have crafted. Is this a loss of self, or simply the next step in our symbiotic relationship with our own creations? But sometimes the balance tips. The healthy respect for the utility of light curdles into a pathological fear of its absence. The tool becomes a tyrant, and the gentle erosion of instinct becomes a chasm of anxiety. For if the city's brief stumble into darkness reveals a collective unease, what does it mean when an individual cannot tolerate a single night without a nightlight? When the fear of the dark ceases to be a rational caution and transforms into a consuming dread that dictates the terms of a life? This is the territory where a natural caution morphs into a prison of its own making, a story not of a species adapting, but of a mind turning its own protective instincts against itself. What happens when the shadow we have pushed so far away grows larger within us? The nightly ritual begins not with a prayer, but with a survey of the territory. A hand fumbles for the small switch on the bedside lamp, casting a warm, contained glow that pushes the shadows to the room's edges. The closet door is checked, a habit so ingrained it feels like a tick. The space beneath the bed is given a fleeting, almost embarrassed glance. The front door is confirmed locked, not once, but twice. This is the domain of an adult, a person who navigates the complexities of a career, relationships, and taxes with competence. Yet when the sun vanishes, a silent, ancient alarm is tripped. They know, with absolute certainty, that there is nothing lurking in the corners of this familiar room. But knowledge is a flickering candle in the vast, dark cathedral of instinct. The light must stay on. Sleep, when it finally comes, is a fragile truce. This is nyctophobia, the persistent, irrational fear of the dark. To label it a simple phobia, however, is to miss the profound depths from which it springs. Its roots are not in the conscious mind, but are tangled deep within the most primitive architecture of our brain. The journey into this fear begins with a biological story, written in the language of neurons and neurotransmitters. At the heart of it lies the amygdala, two tiny, almond-shaped clusters of nuclei buried deep within the temporal lobes. This is our internal sentinel, our first response alarm system for danger. In the dark, when visual information dwindles to nothing, the amygdala shifts to a state of heightened alert. It is no longer receiving the clear, confirming signals from the eyes that say, "All is well." Instead, it must rely on sounds, on subtle shifts in air pressure, on the faintest of creaks from the house settling. In a mind predisposed to fear, the amygdala interprets this ambiguity not as emptiness, but as potential threat. It screams a chemical command to the body, prepare. Adrenaline courses through the veins. The heart hammers against the ribs, muscles tense. This is a brilliant, life-preserving system for a creature navigating a predator-filled night. But for a person in a locked apartment, it is a false alarm of maddening persistence. This neural drama is given its script by a nearby structure, the hippocampus. If the amygdala is the alarm bell, the hippocampus is the librarian of personal experience, the keeper of context and memory. It is here that a childhood nightmare, the monster in the closet that felt terrifyingly real, is stored not as a faded story, but as a potent emotional blueprint. The hippocampus, working in concert with the overactive amygdala, doesn't just recall that a dark space was once frightening. It recreates the feeling, convincing the present moment self that the danger is current, tangible. The darkness itself becomes the trigger, a blank screen upon which the mind projects its most deeply archived terrors. So, The fear is not of the absence of light itself, but of the memories and possibilities that absence unlocks. The brain, in its ancient wisdom, cannot distinguish between the prehistoric danger of a stalking predator and the remembered panic of a 5-year-old. The response is the same, a primal, visceral urge to freeze, to flee, to find light. Is this fear then a malfunction, or is it simply an evolutionary masterpiece that has outlived its immediate utility? This internal conflict is not a new feature of the modern human condition. We find its echoes stretching back through the corridors of history, each era interpreting the symptoms through its own distinct lens. In ancient Rome, medical texts described individuals suffering from insomnia perpetua, perpetual insomnia, attributed to an imbalance of the humors or a melancholic disposition. Their dread of the night was seen as a physical ailment, a corruption of the body's vital fluids. By the Middle Ages, the interpretation had shifted dramatically. A pervasive fear of the dark, particularly when accompanied by visions or a sense of a malevolent presence, was often diagnosed as a spiritual affliction, a sign of demonic influence or witchcraft. The sufferer was not ill but besieged, their terror evidence of a cosmic battle playing out in the shadowy confines of their bedchamber. It was only with the slow dawn of modern psychology that nyctophobia began to be understood as a specific anxiety disorder, a learned pattern of behavior rooted in trauma or conditioning. The demonic became the diagnostic, the spiritual gave way to the scientific. This historical progression reveals a fascinating truth. We have always sought to name the shapeless dread that accompanies the night, projecting our contemporary understanding onto a fundamental, unchanging human experience. Does the way we label a fear ultimately change the nature of the fear itself? Modern psychology, armed with this deeper understanding, has developed tools to confront this ancient adversary. Cognitive behavioral therapy, for instance, operates on the principle that the brain's fearful pathways can be gently, patiently rewired. It does not dismiss the fear as silly, but acknowledges its powerful biological basis. Through gradual exposure, sitting in a dimly lit room, then a darker one, while practicing calming breathing techniques, the therapist helps the patient teach their amygdala a new story. They provide evidence that contradicts the alarmist narrative. See? The darkness is just quiet. The unknown is not inherently hostile. For many, this process is liberating. It is a reclaiming of the night, a slow dimming of the internal alarm. The treatment is a conversation between our sophisticated, reasoning cortex and our ancient, instinctual brain, an attempt to forge a peace treaty between two vastly different ways of perceiving the world. But this leads to a more unsettling, philosophical counterpoint. If this fear is so deeply embedded in our biology, a legacy etched into our very DNA from ancestors for whom the dark was indeed filled with claws and teeth, can it ever be truly unlearned? Or are therapies like CBT merely sophisticated management techniques teaching us to live alongside a part of ourselves that will never fully stand down? Are we not trying to erase the instinct, but rather to educate it, to reassure the inner sentinel that its vigilance, while appreciated, is no longer required in a world of locked doors and electric light? This is a delicate dance. To fully extinguish that primal fear might be to lose something essential, a healthy caution, a respect for the unknown. Yet, to be ruled by it is to live in a perpetual state of siege. So, where does the balance lie? Is the goal to conquer the darkness, or to learn to listen to the fear without allowing it to dictate our lives? Perhaps the first step in navigating this inner landscape is to look more closely at the external one. To understand the fear, we must understand the nature of the thing we fear. The problem is not merely an overactive amygdala or a traumatic memory. The problem is the peculiar quality of darkness itself. What is it about this mere absence of photons that holds such immense psychological power? It is not a thing, but an emptiness. It is a canvas of nothingness that becomes paradoxically the most potent canvas for everything. The true terror of the dark may not be the danger that is hidden within it, but the profound uncertainty it represents. an uncertainty that forces us to confront the limitless and often terrifying capacity of our own imagination. After all, if the fear is born from what we cannot see, then what does it say about us that our minds immediately populate that void with the worst possibilities? Is the dark truly empty, or is it a mirror reflecting the shadows we carry inside? The room is not cold, but a chill settles on your skin. The air is still, thick with a silence so complete it seems to hum. You've just turned off the light and your eyes haven't yet adjusted. There are no shapes, no movements, no sounds beyond the frantic drumming in your own chest. Your hand, reaching for a switch that suddenly feels miles away, is slick with a cold sweat. You stand frozen, breath held, straining to hear something, anything. But there is nothing. That is the entire problem. What are you afraid of when there is absolutely nothing to be afraid of? This fear of the formless dark is an ancient inheritance, a ghost in the machine of our own biology. The first layer of the answer lies in the quiet rebellion happening inside your skull. When light vanishes, the steady stream of data from your eyes to your brain slows to a trickle. The visual cortex, the part of your brain that expertly constructs the world you see, is suddenly starved of information. It sends out a silent alarm. In the absence of confirmed safety, the brain's ancient sentinel, the amygdala, assumes the worst. This small, almond-shaped cluster of neurons, buried deep within the temporal lobe, is our primal threat detection system. It doesn't need a detailed report. A lack of one is cause enough for panic. It floods your body with stress hormones, preparing you for a threat it cannot see, but is certain must be there. Your heart hammers, not because of a monster, but because of a vacuum. The fear is real, a physiological event, yet its origin is a void. Is our most sophisticated organ ultimately betrayed by its own need for constant, reassuring input? This neurological glitch is etched into our collective past. Anthropologists and archaeologists trace its fingerprints across the myths and burial practices of countless ancient cultures. For our ancestors, empty spaces were never truly empty. The deep cave, a place of absolute blackness beyond the fire's reach, was not just a shelter. It was a gateway to the underworld, a womb of the earth that also birthed spirits and demons. The impenetrable forest at night, the abyssal depths of the ocean, these were not merely locations of physical danger from predators, but realms of the unknown, inhabited by entities that required no form. They were presences felt in the stillness, in the sudden drop in temperature, in the uncanny feeling of being watched by the darkness itself. These cultures understood something fundamental. That which has no shape cannot be fought, cannot be reasoned with, and is therefore infinitely more terrifying. Did they worship in the dark not out of fear of the gods they had created, but out of a primal reverence for the terrifying creative potential of the unseen? This brings us to the third, psychological layer, the human mind's profound intolerance for ambiguity. Modern studies consistently show that uncertainty is a more potent source of anxiety than predictable negative outcomes. Knowing a predator is in the room is terrifying, but it directs your fear. Not knowing if there is a predator or what form it might take is a uniquely corrosive form of dread. The darkness does not present a single concrete danger. Instead, it offers a blank canvas, and the mind, unable to tolerate the emptiness, immediately begins to paint. It pulls from the deepest, most archaic corners of memory. A childhood nightmare, the shadow of a branch cast by a passing car, a scene from a forgotten horror film. The fear is not of a specific thing, but of the infinite possibilities of things. It is the fear of potential itself. In our quest for certainty, have we engineered a mind so sophisticated that its greatest torment is the simple, unbearable freedom of the unknown? Yet a paradox remains. If this fear is born of nothing, a mere glitch in perception, why does it often feel more visceral, more paralyzing than the fear of a clearly visible threat? When you see a snake coiled on the path, the fear is sharp, specific, and action-oriented. But the fear in the dark is a slow, creeping dread that seems to seep into your very bones. It has no object, and therefore no end. It can expand to fill the entire room, the entire house, the entire world. A known danger has boundaries. The unknown is limitless. Could it be that the fear of the formless is so powerful precisely because it mirrors our deepest existential anxieties? The fear of death, of non-being, of the great impenetrable silence from which we came and to which we will return. The clear and present danger is a problem to be solved. The darkness is a mystery to be endured. The true monster, then, may not be hiding in the shadows, but in the very organ we use to perceive them. When the brain is deprived of sight, it does not simply shut down. It switches to a different mode, one fueled by memory, emotion, and a desperate creative guesswork. It begins to write its own story on the walls of the void. And the human imagination, that magnificent tool which built civilizations and conceived of gods, becomes in the dead of night its own most terrifying creation. What happens when the storyteller in your head decides the audience needs a good scare? A soft night breeze stirs the curtain, its fabric whispering against the window frame. The old floorboard in the hallway creaks, a familiar sound in the absolute quiet. These are the normal, harmless noises of a sleeping house. But in the theater of your mind, the play has already begun. The curtain's rustle becomes the sigh of an unseen presence. The floor's complaint transforms into the cautious footfall of an intruder. In the absence of light, the mind does not register emptiness. It perceives a canvas, and it begins to paint. It conjures a narrative from the void, turning the mundane into the menacing. This is not a failure of perception, but the stunning, terrifying power of the human imagination unleashed. It is the monster that comes not from the shadows in the room, but from the shadows in our own heads. This nocturnal monster has a precise address in the architecture of the brain, the prefrontal cortex. By day, this region is a master of logic and executive function, a brilliant analyst that plans our future and deciphers the present. It thrives on data, but nightfall starves it. In the dim light, our primary source of information, our vision, falters, sending back grainy, incomplete reports. Deprived of its usual stream of high-fidelity data, the prefrontal cortex does not simply shut down. Instead, it goes into overdrive, desperately trying to complete the picture. It becomes a storyteller in a sensory vacuum, connecting ambiguous dots with the ink of fear and memory. The shifting shadow of a tree branch outside the window is no longer just a shape. It's a clawed hand. The hum of the refrigerator is no longer an appliance. It's a low growl. The brain, in its relentless quest to make sense of the world, would rather invent a threat than accept an information blackout. Is this hypervigilance the ghost of our past? A neurological echo from a time when a rustle in the dark was more likely to be a predator than a plastic bag? Indeed, long before we could map its neural pathways, humanity understood this intimate relationship between darkness and dread. Our oldest myths and legends are testaments to the collective imagination running wild in the unlit hours. Consider the vampire, a creature that shuns the sun and thrives in the perpetual night. Or the werewolf, whose transformation is triggered by the full moon, a celestial lamp that only illuminates the horror. Tales of sleep paralysis, of a malevolent entity sitting on one's chest in the dead of night, are universal. These are not mere coincidences of folklore. They are the cultural crystallizations of a shared human experience. In an era before electric light, when the world was plunged into a profound, inky blackness for half of every day, the darkness was not just an absence. It was a physical, palpable presence. It was the perfect breeding ground for communal fantasies, a stage where the entire village's anxieties could take monstrous form. Were these stories born from a need to explain the unexplainable, or were they simply the shared dreams of a species left alone with its imagination for too long? This ancient dance between the mind and the night finds a stark, modern expression in the phenomenon of nocturnal panic attacks. Unlike fear triggered by an immediate, tangible danger, these episodes are often ignited by the engine of imagination itself. A single fleeting worry, a forgotten task, a vague health concern, can be the first domino. In the quiet of the night, with no external distractions to break the chain, the mind seizes upon this fragment and begins to build a catastrophic narrative. The imagination, unfettered by the rational checks of daytime, spirals. It projects a future of utter ruin, conjures physical sensations of impending doom, and creates a feedback loop of terror that feels as real as any physical threat. The monster here is not a creature of folklore, but a self-generated cascade of thought images, a horror movie written, directed, and starring the individual's own mind. If our brain can fabricate such visceral terror from nothing but a thought, where is the line between a real threat and an imagined one? Is the body's panic any less real when the tiger is only a phantom? Yet, a paradox emerges. If this nighttime fear is a sophisticated product of an overactive prefrontal cortex, a tool of complex analysis and scenario building, then why are young children, whose prefrontal regions are still under construction, often just as terrified of the dark as adults? They lack the intricate reasoning to construct elaborate narratives of intruders or spectral entities. Their fear seems more primal, more immediate. This suggests that the imagination may not be the sole author of this dread. Perhaps it is a deeper, more ancient system at work. The child's fear hints that darkness itself might be a primary trigger, a canvas that requires no complex artistry to become frightening. The monster in the dark may not need a detailed story. Its mere potential for concealment is enough. This implies that the imagination is not the origin of the fear, but its amplifier. It doesn't create the void. It rushes to fill it, and it often fills it with our deepest anxieties. Does this mean the capacity for fear is innate, and imagination merely provides it with a mask and a name? And if the waking imagination is potent, its power becomes absolute when the conscious mind surrenders entirely. When we sleep, the gates are thrown open, and the monster is no longer confined to the shadows of the room. It is invited into the very architecture of our subconscious. This is where the imagination, untethered from reality, weaves the most persistent and universal of our dark tales. It crafts narratives that feel more real than reality itself, stories from which we cannot simply turn on a lamp to escape. Why is it that across cultures and continents, the landscape of our nightmares is so eerily similar? We dream of falling into a bottomless pit, a descent into absolute blackness where the sense of up and down is lost. We find ourselves in a labyrinth of windowless rooms, the doors locking behind us, the light fading until we are swallowed by gloom. Or we are running desperately from an unseen pursuer whose footsteps echo in the dark, a threat whose face we never see, but whose intention is felt with paralyzing certainty. Are these recurring motifs, the abyss, the sealed room, the faceless chase, merely the random byproducts of a brain-cleaning house sorting through the neurological clutter of the day? Or do they point to something far more profound? Could they be a kind of ancestral map charted on the canvas of our unconscious? The darkness in these dreams feels different from the darkness of a room. It is a metaphorical darkness, the darkness of the unknown, of mortality, of repressed desires and unacknowledged fears. The pit is not just a hole in the ground, it is the void we fear we might contain. The locked room is not just a space, it is the confines of our own mind. The pursuer is not a stranger, it is the part of ourselves we are trying to outrun. Perhaps these universal nightmares are not malfunctions of the mind, but its oldest, most vital rehearsals. In the safety of sleep, we practice confronting the primordial fears that have haunted our species since we first huddled around a fire, listening to the dangers lurking beyond the circle of light. The brain, in its infinite wisdom, uses the language of darkness to prepare us for the existential shadows we all must face. So, the next time you jolt awake from a dream of falling, your heart hammering against your ribs, ask yourself, is this simply a neurological glitch, or are you brushing against a truth so deep and so dark that your conscious mind can only process it as a story. And if our darkest dreams are a universal language, what ancient conversation are we having with ourselves in the silent, secret theater of the night? You dream you are running. The corridor stretches before you, an endless tunnel of shadow, the walls slick with a cold sweat you cannot see but can feel. Each door you pass is a promise of escape, but when you force it open, it reveals only a deeper, more absolute blackness. There is something behind you. You never see its face. You only hear the echo of its pursuit, a rhythm that syncopates with your own frantic heart. You know with a certainty that bypasses reason that you must not let it catch you. To be caught is an end far worse than waking. This is one of the oldest stories we tell ourselves, not around campfires, but in the silent, private theater of the mind. It is a universal script, written in the language of primal fear, and the stage for this drama is a specific, haunting geography: the deep pit, the dark room, the endless chase. Why does the sleeping brain, free to conjure any paradise, so often choose to construct these labyrinths of dread? The answers begin not in the realm of spirits, but in the intricate wiring of our own biology. In the quiet hours of the night, when the conscious self has surrendered its post, the brain enters a state of paradoxical frenzy known as REM sleep. Here, the body is paralyzed, a vessel adrift, but the mind is ablaze with activity. Crucially, the rational prefrontal cortex, the seat of logic, of context, of the calming voice that says, "This is just a dream," is largely offline. Meanwhile, the amygdala, the ancient almond-shaped cluster of neurons that serves as our alarm system, is lit up like a city under siege. It is a festival of emotion, particularly fear, operating without a governor. In this state, the brain is not creating fiction. It is conducting a high-stakes rehearsal. It sifts through the emotional residue of the day, the low-grade anxieties and unresolved tensions, and attempts to process them. A vague worry about an impending deadline lacks a visual form, but the amygdala, seeking a container for this abstract unease, reaches for the most fundamental symbols of threat we possess. The dark space, the unseen pursuer, the bottomless fall, these are not arbitrary. They are the brain's native tongue for danger. The darkness is the unknown. The pursuer is the looming consequence. The pit is the loss of control. The dream is not the problem. It is the symptom of a mind trying, and sometimes failing, to file away the sharp edges of our waking fears. This neurological explanation, however, feels like only the first layer of a much deeper excavation. If these dreams are merely personal psychic laundry, why do their motifs echo so precisely across the chasms of time and culture? The ancient Aztecs believed dark dreams were messages from Mictlan, the underworld, warnings of spiritual disharmony. Egyptian dream books, inscribed on papyrus, categorized dreams of falling or being chased as dire omens from the gods, indicating a rupture in one's ma'at, or cosmic order. In traditional Chinese thought, a dream of being trapped in a dark place often signaled an imbalance of yin, a surfeit of the shadowy, cold energies within the body. The specific mythology changes, but the core image remains stubbornly consistent. A human soul, alone and vulnerable, navigating a hostile darkness. This cross-cultural recurrence suggests something more profound than individual psychology. It points to a shared inheritance, a collective nightmare born from our common history as a species. For the greater part of our existence, the night was a physical threat. It was the domain of predators with better night vision than our own, a time when our senses were blunted and our safety was precarious. The dark was not a metaphor for the unknown. It was the unknown, and it was teeming with very real teeth and claws. Is it any wonder that this deep-seated species-level memory would be etched into the very architecture of our dreaming minds? The chase dream becomes a ghostly reenactment of a survival script that was, for millennia, a matter of life and death. From this vantage point, psychology offers a bridge between the biological and the anthropological. Modern therapists often view dreaming as a kind of emotional reset mechanism. By replaying threatening scenarios in a safe space, the mind attempts to desensitize itself, to practice responses, to file away the sharp intensity of fear. But what happens when the volume of waking anxiety is turned up too high? When the worries are too many or too profound? The system becomes overloaded. The reset mechanism falters, and instead of mastering the fear, the dream simply amplifies it. The pursuer gains speed, the corridor elongates, the darkness becomes suffocating. The brain, in its desperate attempt to decode an abstract and overwhelming sense of danger, the threat of financial collapse, the guilt of a failed relationship, the existential dread of mortality, reaches for the most potent symbols it knows. It translates the unmanageable complexity of modern life into the primal, straightforward narrative of the chase. It is not that you are literally running from a monster, it is that your psyche is trying to outrun the sheer weight of being. Yet, a stubborn question remains. If the dream is purely a construct of personal psychology, a neurological glitch, or even a fossil of evolutionary memory, why does the experience feel so other? Why does the presence in the dream feel so distinctly like an intelligence, a malevolence that knows you? The scientific explanations are elegant, satisfying to the rational mind, but they can feel like a map that fails to capture the terrifying texture of the territory. They explain the mechanism of the projector, but not the specific chilling film it plays. Perhaps the fear is not just in us, generated by our own neurons. Perhaps it is also outside us, and the dream state, with its thin veil between the conscious and the unconscious, allows us to perceive it. The dark room in the dream may not be a symbol for a personal fear, but a glimpse into a space that truly exists on some other plane, a space we instinctively recognize and flee from. Maybe we are not running from our own amygdala, but from a shadow that has been chasing humanity since we first gained the terrible gift of self-awareness. This line of thought inevitably leads to a quieter, more unsettling possibility. What if the terror of the dark dream is not a flaw in our design, but a memory we are supposed to forget? A primordial event, a fall from a state of grace, so traumatic that its echo reverberates through every generation, manifesting in this shared nightmare. We spend our lives running from something in the dark, something we dare not look at because on some deep cellular level, we know what it is. We are running from the knowledge of our own separation, our own vulnerability, a truth so devastating that we can only confront it in the disguised, symbolic language of the dream. The thing that chases us in the black corridor, then, is not a monster. It is the part of ourselves we had to leave behind in order to become who we are. But if the night is so deeply woven with threads of fear, how is it that some cultures have learned not to flee the darkness, but to embrace it? What happens when a society decides to stop running, to turn and face the shadow, and in doing so, discovers not a monster, but a sanctuary? For most of our lives, we have been taught to see the night as a void to be filled. We string it with electric stars, flood it with the blue glow of screens, and measure our safety by the wattage of our streetlights. We have declared a war of illumination against the dark, treating it as an enemy to be vanquished, a primitive fear to be overcome. But what if we have been fighting the wrong battle? In the quiet corners of the world, far from the glare of our cities, a different relationship with darkness has been cultivated for centuries, not one of conflict, but of communion. Consider the Japanese aesthetic of wabi-sabi, which finds profound beauty in imperfection and transience. Here, darkness is not an absence, but a presence. It is the soft, velvety shadow in the corner of a tatami-matted room, the deep lacquer of a bowl that doesn't reflect light, but seems to drink it in, creating a pool of serene nothingness. This is a beautiful darkness, one that allows forms to breathe and suggests, rather than shouts. Or travel to the heart of an Arabian desert, where the day's scorching breath has finally stilled. Here, the night is not a time of fear, but of profound silence. People gather not under a blazing sun, but under a canopy of impossible stars, sipping tea as the cool sand shifts beneath them. The darkness is a blanket, a respite, a vast and quiet cathedral. And then there are the monks in traditions from Tibet to Thailand, who voluntarily enter pitch-black retreats for days, even weeks. They sit in chambers where the distinction between eyes open and eyes closed vanishes, where the external world dissolves completely. Why do they not flee? Why do they in fact seek out this absolute negation of light? The answer may lie not in a rejection of the world, but in a search for a more fundamental one within. This deliberate choice to be with darkness, to welcome it, triggers a remarkable shift within the very architecture of our brains. Neuroscience reveals that when we are thrust into the dark against our will, the amygdala, the ancient sentinel of fear, sounds its alarm. But when we choose to step into the shadows, when we actively engage with the night as a sanctuary, a different neural story unfolds. The threat response gradually quiets. In its place, the brain begins to generate slower, more rhythmic alpha waves. This is the signature of wakeful relaxation, a state of calm alertness that borders on meditation. It is as if the brain, freed from the constant, demanding barrage of visual stimuli, can finally turn down its own internal noise. The darkness becomes not a trigger for anxiety, but a catalyst for a deep, physiological quietude. The night, then, is not inherently terrifying. Its character is shaped by our intention. Is our fear of the dark, perhaps, just a fear of the silence it imposes upon our overstimulated minds? This neurological recalibration finds a deep echo in our cultural histories, across continents and epochs. Darkness has often been sanctified as the meeting place of the divine. In Sufi mysticism, the night is the time for solitary prayer and remembrance, a period when the soul can strip away the distractions of the day and commune directly with the beloved. The dark is the necessary canvas upon which the inner light can shine most brightly. Taoist philosophy embraces the concept of yin and yang, where the dark, receptive, feminine yin is not inferior to the bright, active yang, but its essential complement. It is the fertile void from which all life springs, the quiet contemplation that gives meaning to action. Similarly, in Buddhism, the concept of emptiness, often misunderstood as nihilism, is akin to a vast, dark sky. It is the unconditioned space that allows for the liberation from fixed forms and suffering. In these traditions, darkness is the foundation of silence, not the herald of chaos. It is the cradle of insight. What have we lost in our brightly lit modernity by exiling the dark from our spiritual vocabulary? This act of reframing, of transforming darkness from a threat into a sanctuary, is not merely philosophical. It is a powerful tool in the realm of psychology. Modern therapeutic practices for anxiety and depression increasingly incorporate techniques that mirror this ancient wisdom. Patients are guided to sit with their emotional discomfort, to stop fighting the inner shadows of fear and sadness, and to simply observe them without judgment. This process is remarkably analogous to learning to sit in a dark room. The initial impulse is to panic, to turn on a light, any light, to escape the feeling. But by learning to stay, to breathe, to accept the darkness as a temporary state, one discovers a profound truth. The darkness itself is not the enemy. The enemy is the frantic struggle against it. To learn to be at peace with the outer dark is, fundamentally, to learn to be at peace with the often uncomfortable landscape of the inner self. Could our collective insomnia be a symptom of a deeper refusal to face what the quiet hours might reveal? Yet, this path is not for everyone. For some, the night remains an undisputed country of terror. The descending gloom can pull the trapdoor on sanity, unleashing tides of panic that are as visceral as they are inexplicable. A veteran haunted by trauma may find the isolation of night unbearable. A person grappling with grief may find that the darkness amplifies their loneliness to a deafening roar. This stark dichotomy forces a question that lies at the heart of our relationship with the cosmos. Who or what ultimately decides the face of the night? Is it a universal constant, or is it painted by the unique brush of individual experience? Perhaps the answer is woven from threads of evolutionary memory, ancestral history, and personal biography. The same darkness that cradles the mystic may stalk the insomniac. The same stars that guide the desert traveler may mock the lost. This divergence suggests that our journey with the night is not a simple narrative of conquest or surrender, but a complex dialogue written into our very biology. And it is here, at the intersection of personal fear and ancestral inheritance, that the story takes a deeper, more intimate turn. What if the roots of this relationship are not just cultural or psychological, but etched into the ancient code of our genes? What if some of us are, quite literally, built for the light? The day's warmth fades, not just from the air, but from the light itself. The world contracts from a panorama of color to a monochrome of shadows and sounds. And as this transition completes, a different kind of signal travels through you, a chemical whisper in the bloodstream. It is a feeling so universal, so deeply ingrained, that we rarely pause to consider its strangeness. The heavy-lidded pull towards sleep as darkness falls, and the corresponding, almost cellular alertness that arrives with the dawn. We attribute it to a long day, to habit, to the simple turning of the planet. But what if this rhythm is more than a pattern? What if it is an ancient inscription, a story written in the very language of our cells, a legacy passed down through hundreds of thousands of dawns and dusks? This internal cadence, our circadian rhythm, is not a gentle suggestion from the body. It is a strict molecular regime. At its heart are genes, tiny segments of DNA that act as the most fundamental architects of our existence. Among them, genes like clock and PR function as the master timekeepers. They operate on a near 24-hour loop, producing proteins that accumulate during the day, slowly signaling a state of wakefulness, and then degrade throughout the night, paving the way for sleep. The fascinating detail, uncovered by geneticists, is that the most common variations of these genes in humans code for a morning chronotype. We are, by our fundamental blueprint, creatures of the light. This genetic predisposition is not an accident of evolution, but a stark lesson in survival. For our ancestors on the African savanna, the night was not a time for productivity or social gathering. It was a realm of acute vulnerability. While predators with specialized eyesight claimed the darkness, early Homo sapiens retreated to the relative safety of firelight and shelter. The setting sun was not a cue for entertainment, but a command to seek refuge. To be a night owl in that environment was not a personality quirk. It was a potentially fatal deviation from the safety of the collective rhythm. Our DNA, then, carries the ghostly imprint of a primordial fear, the fear of what moves in the dark. This genetic story finds its echo in the silent testimony of the ancient world. Archaeological digs, sifting through the layers of time, rarely uncover evidence of significant nocturnal activity. The tools of survival, spear points, grinding stones, sewing awls, are found in contexts that speak of daylight labor. The hunt, the gathering, the travel, the crafting. These were the affairs of the sun. The night was a parenthesis, a time for hunkering down, for conserving energy, for storytelling by the fire that served as both a tool for warmth and a psychological bulwark against the encircling unknown. The darkness was a blanket under which the community rested, and the human genome was its faithful timepiece, ensuring that the body's energy was spent when it was most effective and most safe. We were designed to be solar-powered, our biology fine-tuned to the cosmic cycle of our star. The modern world, with its electric suns and globalized 24-hour economy, often feels like a grand experiment testing the limits of this ancient wiring. The night shift worker, the international traveler, the student burning the midnight oil, they are all engaged in a quiet rebellion against their own biology. Psychological studies consistently show the cost of this rebellion: higher rates of sleep disorders, metabolic issues, heightened stress, and anxiety. It is as if the body, confused by this perpetual daylight, is constantly searching for the missing night, triggering low-grade alarm systems meant for genuine threat. The feeling of being out of sync is more than a metaphor. It is a physiological state of discord between our internal genetic clock and the external artificial one we have imposed upon it. The body remembers the old dangers even when the mind has forgotten them. So, when we force ourselves to be alert in the deep hours of the night, are we not fighting a battle against an immensely powerful, deeply coded part of ourselves? And yet, the story is not so simple, for within every tribe, there were exceptions. There were always those who remained awake, their eyes scanning the darkness beyond the fire's glow. The sentinels, these individuals, the night watchmen of our deep past, present a fascinating paradox. Were they genetic outliers, possessing a rare variant of the clock gene that allowed them to be vigilant when others slept? Or is their legacy something else entirely? A testament to the human capacity to override genetic programming for the sake of the group. Perhaps the true story is not one of a single, rigid human rhythm, but of a necessary duality. The survival of the collective depended as much on the quiet rest of the many as it did on the piercing alertness of the few. The majority could sleep deeply, their genetic predisposition to daytime activity ensuring they would be strong for the dawn, precisely because a select few had willingly, or perhaps inherently, stepped outside of that rhythm to stand guard. This duality hints at a deeper layer of our nature. It suggests that our genetic inheritance is not a prison, but a palette of potentials. The same DNA that craves the safety of the sun also contains the capacity for nocturnal vigilance, a capacity that would be awakened by necessity. The sentinel was not working against human nature, but expressing a different, equally crucial facet of it. The tribe needed both the sleeper and the watcher. So, while our genomes may tell a story of a species that retreats from the dark, our history tells another story altogether, one of those who learn to see in it. If our DNA is the cradle of our rhythms, then what force of will or circumstance allows one to become the guardian of that cradle? This leads us to a quieter, more profound question, one that lingers in the space between the setting sun and the rising moon. If the comfort of the majority is built upon the vigilance of a few, what does that say about the very structure of our societies, then and now? The sentinel on the wall, the artist in the lonely studio, the nurse on the graveyard shift, they all share a common thread. They are the ones who negotiate with the darkness so that others may dream safely. But what is the true cost of such vigilance? What happens to the mind and the spirit when one is permanently out of phase with the primordial rhythm of the world? The night watchman does not simply stay awake. He enters a different state of consciousness, a liminal space between the dreaming world of his tribe and the raw, untamed night. He becomes the eyes of the community in the shadows. But in doing so, does he risk losing something of himself in the darkness? In the deep velvet silence of a prehistoric night, under a canopy of stars unseen by city lights, the world belonged to the predators. The air, cool and carrying the scent of damp earth, was punctuated by the rustle of unseen things and the distant calls of hunters. Inside a small circle of huts, the entire tribe slept, a collective organism breathing in unison, safe in the illusion of stillness, all but one. By the glowing heart of the communal fire, a figure sat, back straight, eyes not just open, but absorbing the darkness. Their ears were not merely hearing, but parsing the symphony of the night, distinguishing the harmless scuttle of an insect from the deliberate, padded footfall of something larger. There were no accolades for this vigil, no songs sung of their quiet endurance. Yet, the survival of the entire group, the fragile thread of continuity from one day to the next, depended entirely on this single, unsung individual. If the fire died, so too might they. If the warning cry came a moment too late, the story would end before dawn. This is the ancient, unspoken covenant of the night watch. This state of being, this perpetual readiness, is etched into the very wiring of some human minds. Modern neuroscience gives it a clinical name, hypervigilance. It is a nervous system perpetually tuned to a higher frequency, a radar sweeping an endless horizon for blips of potential threat. Even in moments of rest, the amygdala, the brain's ancient sentinel, remains partially on guard, its siren silent, but its hand never far from the alarm. For the night watch, this was not a disorder. It was a supreme advantage. In a world where danger was literal and toothy, the ability to perceive the faintest crack of a twig or the subtle shift in the wind's scent was the difference between life and death. Theirs was a consciousness that lived in the liminal space between sleep and wakefulness, where the boundaries of the self blurred and the sounds of the forest became a language they could almost understand. Their heightened state was a gift to the tribe, a neurological shield against the creeping terrors of the dark. The evidence of their lonely vigil is whispered to us from the distant past, not in grand monuments, but in the quietest of archaeological finds. At sites like Blombos Cave in South Africa, where early humans etched abstract designs into ochre, or Shanidar in Iraq, where Neanderthals laid their dead to rest with flowers, we find the subtle traces of the night. Scatterings of charcoal, not from a massive cooking fire, but from a smaller, carefully maintained glow. Fish bones, charred at the tips, suggesting a meal taken not in the busyness of day, but in the solitary hours. These are the remnants of the watchfire, the silent companion to the watcher. They tell us that the night was not a void of inactivity. It was a time of maintenance, of quiet contemplation, of ensuring that the embers of safety and community would survive to greet the sun. The night watch was the keeper of time itself, measuring the slow march of stars until the first hint of gray touched the horizon. In our modern, electrified world, the role of the night watch has not vanished. It has simply transformed. The fire is now the glow of a monitor in a hospital's ICU, where a nurse's trained eyes scan the rhythmic blips of a patient's heartbeat. It is the headlights of a long-haul trucker cutting a solitary path through the sleeping continent, their senses attuned to the slightest shudder of the wheel or the vague drift of a car ahead. It is the security guard making rounds in a silent, cavernous building, their hearing sharpened for a sound that does not belong. These are the inheritors of that ancient covenant. They too operate on the periphery of the collective sleep, their circadian rhythms sacrificed for the safety and functioning of the whole. And like their prehistoric counterparts, they often bear the invisible cost, a higher baseline of stress, a nervous system that struggles to power down, a sensitivity to potential threats that can, in the peaceful light of day, seem like shadows without substance. This is the paradox of the watchful. The very trait that made them indispensable, the hyper-alertness, the deep-seated anticipation of threat, is a double-edged sword. In an environment largely scrubbed of immediate physical danger, this ancient wiring can become a prison. The mind, trained to hunt for predators in the shadows, now finds them in an unanswered email, a casual comment from a stranger, the ambiguous silence of a loved one. What was once a survival mechanism can curdle into the debilitating symptoms of anxiety disorders or post-traumatic stress. The night watch's gift becomes a lifelong burden, a constant low-grade alarm that never fully silences. So, we are left to wonder, is the fear of the dark a hardwired advantage, a crucial legacy from our ancestors that has kept our species alive? Or is it the price paid across generations, a psychic tax levied by evolution for the simple, terrifying act of being a vulnerable creature in a dangerous world? This question, however, hangs incomplete in the air, like smoke from a dying fire. It assumes a universal experience of vigilance, a single archetype for the watcher. But the story of who kept watch in the deep night is far more complex, and the shadows hold another often overlooked figure. For in many of those ancient tribes, the one stirring the embers, listening for the cry of a child as well as the growl of a beast, was not always a man. What happens when we consider that the eyes scanning the darkness might have belonged to her? The forest at night is not silent. It is a different kind of quiet. It is a tapestry woven from the rustle of unseen things, the sigh of the wind through high branches, and the distant, questioning call of a night bird. For a group of hikers, Their world had shrunk to the small, defiant circle of light cast by their headlamps. The beams cut through the absolute black, illuminating the path immediately ahead, but making the surrounding darkness seem all the more profound and impenetrable. They moved with the cautious rhythm of city dwellers in an ancient place, their chatter subdued. Then, one of them, a woman, stopped dead. Her body went rigid, a silhouette against the artificial light. "Wait," she whispered, her voice tight. "I have a bad feeling." The others paused, scanning the walls of trees with their lights. They saw nothing, heard nothing out of the ordinary, just the same familiar night sounds. There were jokes, gentle reassurances. "It's just the dark playing tricks," someone said. But she stood her ground, her intuition a solid, unshakable weight in her gut. Reluctantly, the group decided to wait, to rest for a moment in that unsettling spot. 10 minutes later, a shift in the wind, a change in the angle of a headlamp, revealed it. The unmistakable, spectral glint of eyeshine low to the ground, and behind it, the fluid, muscular form of a leopard, melted perfectly into the shadows, having watched them pass. There had been no sound, no clear sign, only a feeling. This moment, suspended between intuition and tangible threat, raises a question that echoes far beyond that forest path. Is a woman's relationship with the darkness fundamentally one of fear, or is it a different, more nuanced form of perception? The common narrative often simplifies it to the former, framing the dark as a space of feminine vulnerability. But what if this sensitivity is not a weakness, but a sophisticated, hardwired capacity to read the unseen text of the night? The answer, as with most things human, is written in layers: biological, anthropological, and psychological, each adding a thread to the complex tapestry. At the most fundamental biological level, the difference begins deep within the brain, within the ancient architecture of the limbic system. This is the seat of emotion and memory, our early warning radar for the world. Research suggests that, on average, the female brain exhibits a more pronounced neurobiological response to ambiguous sensory input, a sudden, unplaceable sound, a flicker of movement in the periphery. This is not a flaw in the system, but perhaps an evolutionary refinement. For much of human history, the role of the primary caregiver, often shouldered by women, demanded a hypervigilance that operated below the level of conscious thought. While a male hunter might focus intently on the pursuit of a single prey, the protector of the hearth and the young had to maintain a diffuse, constant awareness of the entire environment. A subtle crack of a twig, an unusual silence where there should be insect chatter, a faint, unfamiliar scent on the air. These were not just curiosities. They were data points in a constant calculation of safety. This heightened sensitivity, a legacy etched into the very circuits of the brain, could be the ghost of a million nights spent listening, not just for the predator's roar, but for the predator's breath. This biological predisposition was then shaped and honed by culture, a story told by anthropologists who study the rhythms of traditional societies. In many nomadic and foraging cultures, the division of labor created distinct spheres of environmental knowledge. While men often mastered the vast, sunlit geography of the hunt, women became the cartographers of the intimate, the domestic, and the nocturnal. They were the keepers of the sleeping camp, the ones who stirred at the slightest whimper of a child, who could distinguish between the harmless scuttling of a lizard and the more deliberate footfall of an intruder by the firelight's edge. Theirs was an expertise born of necessity, an intimate, nuanced understanding of the night's normal sounds and smells, which made any deviation from that norm scream with significance. This was not a passive fear, but an active, skilled surveillance. The darkness was their workplace, a domain they navigated with a sensory map that was detailed and precise. Could it be that what we now often dismiss as a woman's intuition in the dark is the modern echo of this deeply ingrained, culturally reinforced role of the nocturnal sentinel? Modern psychology adds a fascinating, seemingly paradoxical layer to this understanding. Studies consistently show that women report a higher level of fear of the dark than men. This is often taken at face value as evidence of greater vulnerability. Yet, when this fear is tested against actual performance, a different picture emerges. In experiments designed to assess the accuracy of threat detection in low information or ambiguous scenarios, women frequently demonstrate a higher degree of precision. They are quicker to identify genuine danger signals amid the noise and less likely to raise false alarms from benign stimuli. This suggests that the fear is not a paralyzing phobia, but rather the conscious experience of a highly tuned and therefore more frequently activated threat assessment system. It is the feeling of an alarm bell that is calibrated to a more sensitive setting. The system is designed to err on the side of caution, generating a sense of unease, a bad feeling, when the data is incomplete, but potentially lethal. Is the fear, then, not the problem, but the solution? Is it the price paid for a perceptual gift that has, for millennia, kept the vulnerable safe? Yet, to speak in broad strokes of women and men is to ignore the vibrant spectrum of individual experience. There are women who fearlessly navigate the deepest caves and the most remote wilderness trails, their confidence in the dark absolute. Conversely, there are men for whom the setting sun brings a tide of anxiety, their senses straining against a perceived menace in every shadow. This variation forces us to ask, is the crucial variable gender itself, or is it the specific life experiences, the cultural conditioning, and the personal history that shape an individual's relationship with the unknown? The biological hardware may provide a baseline, a potential, but it is the software of lived experience, the stories we are told, the lessons we learn, that writes the final program. Does the environment not act as a key, turning the lock on predispositions that might otherwise lie dormant? Perhaps, then, the fear is not merely a neural reaction or a cultural artifact, but something that has been carefully, subtly, and often unconsciously instilled. It is a lesson absorbed from the very air we breathe, a story whispered so early and so often that it becomes indistinguishable from instinct. And if we seek the primary vehicle for this transmission, the place where the abstract concept of darkness is first given form, intention, and voice, we need look no further than the stories told at the threshold of sleep, for it is there, in the safe space of a child's bedroom, that the darkness truly comes alive, not as an absence of light, but as a presence. It is given a shape, a name, and a purpose. What happens when the very instinct designed to protect us is woven into the fairy tales meant to comfort? Go to sleep, or the onke will come for you. It is a sentence whispered in the dim light of a child's bedroom, a phrase that has echoed in various tongues for generations. The specific monster's name changes: Bogeyman, Babao, Butsaman, but the essence remains, a presence conjured from the shadows, whose sole purpose is to enforce the boundary between wakefulness and sleep. But who, or what, is this creature of the night? And why does its power seem to swell precisely when the sun retreats, leaving the world to the mercy of the moon and the imagination? The answer begins not in the realm of folklore, but in the quiet theater of the brain. As a story is told, the brain does not remain a passive audience. The temporal lobes, gatekeepers of sound and language, ignite to process the words. But then the narrative travels deeper into the ancient limbic system, the seat of emotion and memory. In the darkness, a crucial transformation occurs. With the primary sense of sight subdued, the internal projector of the mind takes over. There are no visual distractions, no competing inputs from the external world. The words become worlds. The voice of the storyteller is the only guide through a landscape painted entirely by neural fire. This neurological alchemy, the combination of narrative, emotion, and sensory deprivation, forges memories of unparalleled strength. The fear of the onke is not just heard. It is felt, embodied, and cemented into the very architecture of the self. The story becomes a part of the listener, a ghost in the neural machine. This haunting is a universal human inheritance. From the dense, whispering forests of European fairy tales to the sun-baked deserts where jinns are said to ride the wind, From the vampire myths that stalk the villages of Eastern Europe to the malevolent tree spirits of Southeast Asia, every culture has personified the darkness. The boogeyman is not a singular invention but a recurring character in the global human story. Anthropologically, this is no coincidence. These stories are collective nightmares, born from a time when the night was a genuinely dangerous frontier. The rustle in the bushes could be the wind, or it could be a predator. The strange sound in the attic could be settling wood, or it could be something else entirely. By giving the amorphous fear a name and a shape, our ancestors performed an act of profound courage. They took the unmanageable existential terror of the unknown and condensed it into a manageable entity. A thing that, however terrifying, could be understood, outsmarted, or even placated. The monster in the story is a container for the chaos that lies just beyond the flickering light of the fire. For a child, this container is a vital psychological tool. The world is vast, complex, and filled with rules they do not yet comprehend. The darkness represents all that is unknowable and therefore threatening. The bedtime story, with its personified shadow, becomes a safe simulator. It is here, in the cradle of a parent's voice, that a child learns to navigate fear itself. They experience the thrill of danger from a position of ultimate security. The monster arrives, the tension builds, and, crucially, it is always resolved, or at least held at bay until morning. This ritual is a rehearsal for life's larger anxieties. It teaches that fear can be faced, that it has a beginning and an end, and that the imagination is not just a source of terror, but also the very instrument of control. We give the darkness a face so that we may learn to look it in the eye. Yet, this elegant system contains a paradox. If these stories are meant to be tools for mastering fear, why do their echoes often linger long after we have outgrown the bedtime ritual? Why does a grown adult, rational and aware, sometimes feel a primal jolt of unease when walking down a dark hallway? The stories themselves have faded into vague recollections, but the emotional resonance, the quickening pulse, the heightened awareness, remains. It suggests that the narrative was merely the delivery mechanism. The cargo it carried, the visceral limbic memory of fear, was unloaded into the basement of the psyche, where it remains, waiting for the right conditions to stir. The stories did not leave. They went underground, transforming from explicit tales into implicit emotional truths. The Onke is no longer a character in a story, but a feeling in the blood. And when that feeling escapes the realm of metaphor to become a recurring, unbidden experience in waking life, the darkness ceases to be a symbol. It becomes a prison. The mind, which once used stories to navigate fear, can itself become a teller of terrifying, unstoppable tales. The shadows are no longer a canvas for imagination, but a trigger for a reality that feels more real than the daylight world. The line between the monster under the bed and the monster within blurs. If the bedtime story is the cradle of our fears, what happens when the cradle itself becomes the thing we cannot escape? This is the point where the narrative breaks down, where the comforting rhythm of beginning, middle, and end is replaced by a frantic, looping script. The fear is no longer a lesson, it is a condition. And in this state, we instinctively reach for the oldest antidote we know. We fumble for the light switch. That simple, desperate act is more than a practical solution. It is a deeply philosophical gesture. It is a plea for the world to return to its legible state. For if the darkness is where our deepest fears are born and take root, then light must be the agent of their dissolution. But is it? Does light truly banish the monsters? Or does it merely force them to change their shape, to retreat into even subtler shadows, waiting for the next inevitable failure of the bulb, the next sunset? What, after all, is the true nature of the light we so desperately seek? You flick on the flashlight. The beam, a sharp blade of white, cuts through the velvet black of the forest. What was a formless wall of menace just a moment ago now resolves into the familiar. the gnarled bark of an oak, the delicate tracery of a fern, a beetle's iridescent shell caught mid-scuttle. The tightness in your chest loosens. The primal drumbeat of your heart slows. It feels like a minor miracle. The light has not merely illuminated the path, it has soothed the mind. But is this simple comfort, this quieting of fear, just a side effect of being able to see? Or is the relationship between light and our perception of reality far more profound, a fundamental key we've been using to decode the world since the first human sheltered by a flame? At its most basic biological level, light is the raw data our brain requires to build a coherent model of the world. When photons strike the retina, they initiate a cascade of electrical signals, a frantic Morse code racing towards the visual cortex at the back of the skull. This region doesn't just passively receive an image, it is a frantic assembly line, deconstructing edges, shadows, colors, and motions. It cross-references this torrent of information with memories, stitching together a best-guess simulation of what is out there. Crucially, this act of visual processing is not an isolated event. As the visual cortex busily maps the territory, it sends reassuring signals to the amygdala, the brain's ancient alarm bell. The message is simple: situation analyzed, threat assessment low. The light, by enabling analysis, directly dials down the primal fear. It transforms the unknown into the known, the potential predator into a pattern of bark and shadow. The world becomes a place that can be measured and understood, and a mind that can measure is a mind that can feel safe. But what happens when the measuring tools are taken away? When the data stream ceases, the amygdala, unshackled from the cortex's rational constraints, is free to imagine the worst possible interpretations of every rustle and sigh. The darkness, then, is not the presence of monsters, but the absence of information. This neurological truce brokered by light is etched deep into our evolutionary past. Long before the electric hum of a bulb, there was the crackle and dance of fire. The mastery of flame was a watershed moment, arguably the moment we began to step away from the pure reactivity of the animal world. It allowed us to cook food, unlocking calories that fueled the growth of our complex, energy-hungry brains. But its psychological and social impact was perhaps even more transformative. The fire became a portable sun, a tiny island of order carved out of the chaotic darkness. Around its warmth, the night was pushed back. Predators, large and small, hesitated at the edge of the circle of light. For the first time, darkness was no longer an absolute prison. It was a perimeter that could be held. This firelight extended the day, creating time for social bonding, for storytelling, for the slow fermentation of culture and language. The circle of flickering light became a cradle for community, a stage for the shared rituals that defined us. The fear of the dark was, quite literally, kept at bay by the very technology that allowed us to become more fully human. Could it be that our modern comfort with electric light is simply an extension of this ancient pact? A subconscious memory of safety found within that primordial circle? Modern psychology confirms the enduring power of this pact. Therapies for nyctophobia, the intense fear of darkness, often employ a technique of gradual, controlled exposure. A patient isn't thrust into absolute blackness. Instead, they learn to sit in a room where the darkness is softened by a nightlight or a sliver of moonlight through a curtain. The goal is not to eliminate light, but to use its minimal presence as a psychological anchor. That faint glow is enough to keep the visual cortex engaged, to prevent the amygdala from triggering a full-scale panic. It reassures the conscious mind that the environment is still knowable, that the rules of physics still apply. The light, even in trace amounts, maintains the crucial link between perception and reality, allowing the brain to slowly, carefully, rewrite its fearful associations. It is a delicate dance on the threshold, using the very thing that defines safety to gently confront the source of terror. But what if the fear is not of the darkness itself, but of what the darkness might reveal? Yet, for all its power, light has its limits. We have all known moments when, despite a well-lit room, a lingering unease persists. The hallway light is on, the closet door is shut, but a childish conviction remains that something is waiting, just out of sight. The light has done its job. It has provided all the visual data one could ask for. The space is objectively safe. And yet, the fear endures. This stubborn anxiety suggests that the darkness we fear is not always, or not only, an external condition. The light can banish the shadows in the room, but can it illuminate the shadows within us? The beam of the flashlight can show you the tree, but it cannot show you what your mind projects onto that tree when the beam moves away. So, what allows this fear to persist, even when we have all the light we need? Perhaps the answer lies not in the quality of the illumination, but in the nature of the perceiver. The light reveals the world, but it also reveals the limits of our own perception. It shows us what is there, but in doing so, it highlights the infinite possibilities of what could be there, just beyond the edge of the beam. The fear that survives the light is a more sophisticated fear. It is no longer a fear of the unknown, but a fear of the knowable unknown, the things we are capable of imagining. The external darkness is vanquished, only to be replaced by an internal one. The beam of the flashlight sweeps across the forest floor, and for a moment, everything is clear. But when you turn it off, the afterimage burns on your retina, a fleeting ghost of the light itself. And in that moment of transition, a question forms. If light is the tool we use to decode reality, what happens when the thing we need to decode is the decoder itself? What if the true source of the shadow is not the absence of light, but the shape of the mind that casts it?